Everyone, thank you for joining us on a Monday night. It's a double header this week. I would like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order. There will be another special Board of Education meeting. This is the wrong motion. I would like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting will be held tomorrow, January 25th at 7:30 p.m. in the board meeting room. So thank you all for coming, and I'm sure we'll see most of you tomorrow night. My chairperson's report is brief. Just thank you for all the public comment. Thank you for all the emails and phone calls. It's important that we continue to hear from everyone as we go through the budget process and we look at some of these programs. So in the interest of time, I will turn it over to Dr. Adley. And I know we have some guests here from CES, the Executive Director and Open Choice Coordinator. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Adley, for discussion on open choice.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. To those who are sitting in front of us, thank you for coming this evening. To those who are watching or participating by Zoom, thank you for your participation. I'd also like to welcome our principals this evening by Zoom. They're here in support, obviously, of open choice. And a warm welcome to Dr. Chip DeMay. Chip is the Executive Director of our Cooperative Educational Services, CES, which is one of the 6 RESC organizations that serve school districts in the state of Connecticut. And Eric Nyquist. Eric is the Open Choice Coordinator from CES. So both will be available for us this evening. So with the board's understanding, you have received a PowerPoint presentation. There is an open choice fact sheet, and then there are questions and answers. With your understanding, I would go through the open choice presentation, which should include a lot of what's included in the fact sheet and also the questions, just to make sure that we get certainly to our 2 presenters this evening. After the open choice presentation, we can open the floor up for questions and also dialogue with the Executive Director and the Open Choice Coordinator. After that, we can revisit questions that we have prepared or that are still outstanding. Okay.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Adley.
Thank you, sir. So I honestly am excited to present about the open choice. This has been on the table in different capacities for the last couple of years, and it's nice to see it come full circle for consideration in the FY23 budget. So some of the background: this was a state strategy at one point to address the 2003 Schiff versus O'Neill desegregation settlement agreement. It started out as Project Concern. Many districts participated in Project Concern before there was compensation for any sort of tuition or grant that followed the students. It has, to this point, existed in New Haven and Bridgeport. We have the opportunity, as you know, to participate here in Norwalk and the Danbury area. Danbury, it doesn't seem it's going to go forward. In all honesty, that doesn't seem to be playing out in that area for different reasons of participation for districts or otherwise. Whether there's a reluctance to participate or whether they want to revisit at a different time. I would hope that we would look at that and also I would hope that we would lead in this and not be a follower in this capacity. This is an opportunity for us to lead in this arena. But with that, Danbury is not going to be participating. We are also required from the state of Connecticut to talk to issues of how we are reducing racial, ethnic, and economic isolation. This supports that request from the State Department of Education. And over 3,000 students participate across the state. And Chip can talk about the participation in our particular region. It was mentioned before, and I will just share that I have testified on numerous occasions over many years on open choice. I've testified in front of the legislator from a superintendent point of view. I've testified as the Hartford area chair and president, and I've testified as the Connecticut Association of Public Schools Superintendents president. The idea of asking for funding, more funding, is not mutually exclusive when you're speaking on behalf of either your district or other districts in the sense of advocating for additional funding for the program. you can support it, but you can also advocate. Many times I've had to advocate for not just my own district in Granby, right, at the time, but for other districts so that it were represented. But I also did for my own district at that particular time. That is true. I'm actually proud of that. We have been a participant of Open Choice for probably for over 40 years in my experience, or the district's experience, and have led in many ways in that capacity. So there is testimony there. That is correct. And I also testified on this new legislation to move this initiative forward. I personally think in terms of moving this district and also the state of Connecticut forward, it actually is one of the most economic ways to actually expand diversity and the idea of choice in some capacity. So it's with that you will see testimony that has been submitted. Current recommendations, obviously Darien was precluded from participating primarily because of the transportation, the distance and the ride from Bridgeport, if that's the case. You will see a difference here. We did say that it was 3,000. There's actually 3,000 in the grant, but there's for participation in the first year, there's an additional 1,000 per student. So for the first year of participation, it's 4, and for the years thereafter, it's 3,000. So with the idea of like 16 students in kindergarten, the revenue obviously would be 64,000. This is a partnership with CES that serves this particular region. Again, I did share that my local colleagues around, Wilton is considering it for the next school year. That's the FY23, and New Canaan is considering it for FY24. They have pushed off their initiative for a year. Again, I've just shared that I think this is an opportunity for our district to lead and not necessarily wait for other people in this particular capacity. I think this is the right thing to do for our students and also for other students who would attend. There is a reciprocity for our students to actually attend schools in Norwalk should they wish to do that. We have several students at the moment who are actually participating in schools, and you'll see those in the questions. We have 4 in the global studies. With other students who are participating in Stanford at the moment, 5 at Rogers International, 4 at the Academy of Information and Technology, and 3 at JMW Wright Technical School in Stanford. So there's a new Norwalk High School that's being built. People know about that. If students, for whatever reason, would like to participate in that, they would be able to participate there. The selection process, I'm going to let Dr. Dumais actually talk to the selection process, because it's been described as a lottery. By myself, it's been described as a lottery. Now it's been described as a selective process. So I would like, after this concludes, just for Chip to actually speak really directly to what's the nature of that lottery, right, and how are students selected, because I know that was one of the questions that the board wanted to be addressed. I do think you know already that if the students are selected, that they remain with us as a Darien student throughout their tenure. The investing in the open choice, the short version of that is it's the 4,000 for the first year, 3,000 thereafter. Yes, the district will encounter some costs. I'll just share just very briefly here, just the costs, incremental costs associated with being in kindergarten through 5th grade. You know, we have the formula that's in the budget book. We also have technology that we account for, although for the most part we have those Chromebooks for students. So those are the incremental costs, and I will post what I'm going to show you in a moment. I inserted a slide that I thought might be helpful for the board and for the public, for that matter. And I'll post this slide here. I'll post that slide this evening once we're concluded. So this just shows you that if you take the first cohort of students, and the first cohort of students being hypothetically for next year, if we're taking the 16 students, and if those students stayed in the system through 23, 24, so on, right? So up until they get up to 5th grade, FY24, you select the next cohort of students and so on and so forth. So you see in the first year, the incremental cost is 2,200 essentially, that the grant is 48. So you have a net benefit of about 45. So if we just go to the end here, this takes the students right through until they're going to enter middle school. And so you can see the total grant is 264. The cost, just given our numbers that we're using, is 37,000. And therefore you have a balance of 226. If you were to say, well, what about the middle school? The middle school is, honestly, it's a wee bit more difficult to actually hypothesize. There's no formula for the middle school. Depends which classes the kids go in, what resource, what sports, athletics, clubs, whatever they have to do. But if you took the kids running through, just for round numbers, if you took the students running through and there was about 40 students, and let's even say it was $1,000, it's not going to be per student. I mean, that's $40,000 against 40 students times the $3,000, which is 120,000. The cost for it is going to be outweighed by the actual grant. But I can't do it just an apples for apples because there's just so many choices moving forward. But hopefully this gives you a wee sense of, well, what's the potential outlay during primary school, and just using round numbers to the middle school kind of, I think you can safely say that it's not going to cost as much in the middle school unless you're breaking sections and so on and so forth. So that gives you a wee bit of a sense of just, I think, one of the financials that the board perhaps was looking for in terms of just rolling it forward a little bit. You'll notice that there's 12-12 right there, not 16-16, because we're not breaking sections by doing the 12 and the 12. The future enrollment, we'll be taking 72 students after next year. So that is really sort of, again, just rolled forward as we just spoke about. The enrollment at the middle school would not exceed, actually in the last 10 years, there's twice, it would be up at about 1,170. It wouldn't exceed those. And trying to see what that I can't completely confirm what that middle school was built for, but it seems safely built for about 1,200 people. That's not, with the kids running through there, we're not going to touch that. In fact, we're not going to hit the highs that we've had on two separate occasions over the past 10 years. Transportation is through CES. We are reimbursing that. I think I said at one of the meetings that the after-school program would be supplied by the CES. Now, in the crack area, for instance, it was at one point. It started out, it wasn't, then it went to that it was. I told you that it was here. Then I checked with Chip and he says, well, it might be. And there's probably more opportunity to talk to him this evening that it's likely that it will be. So, but I don't want to confirm that. He can speak for himself in that regard. The reimbursement, essentially for special education costs, we get all the reimbursement except for the initial 3,000 and 4,000. Actually, if you see any testimony, you may have seen that I have actually complained about that in the sense of advocated for, we should have the fourth, why are you taking the 4,000 off as to start with? I just don't think that should be the case. And in the past, by the way, I should have mentioned, I've also advocated for an open choice grant that accompanied this sort of funding. It's called this funding is called a grant, but there was a different academic support grant that also accompanied that, and the state took it away, and so I was advocating for that too. But so basically, we'll get back any special education costs, except for the first, the 3,000 or 4,000 would have to be returned. Program benefits, I'm not going to read down this. You've had the opportunity to look at it, but there's everything from social and emotional to intellectual benefits for our students. But the program is good by any capacity. The diversity that it brings for our students as much, in fact, in many ways, maybe even more so for our own students, our own population, as well as the population of young people who come from Norwalk. I have included a link to, not in the PowerPoint, but in the questions. I did include a wee link of a video. I didn't want to play the video this evening, but I think if you look at the sort of qualitative response from parents and students and past graduates who were in the program, not in the CES area, in the Hartford area. I can't access a video in this particular area, but it'll give you a sense from a parent point of view, from a student point of view, past graduate point of view, of some of the benefits that they speak to in the program. The Open Choice Liaison, this is what is in the budget, as you know, and this is an important part to make the program work. This person will work with students, staff, community members, parents, from parents who are in our district, and also the parents who are in the Open Choice program. This will also work with the CES liaison, because they have a liaison also. And that person would liaison with our liaison in terms of anything from transportation to support services to enrichment activities, staying late for games, whatever it happens to be. Of course, we have to remember, we're talking about kindergartners for the first year, right? I'm getting way ahead of myself in some ways, but we're talking about kindergartners. Professional development, in the legislation, there was funding for professional development, which would be offered through CES and probably in this most likely in the spring and also over the summer. I would say that we are doing professional development in the area of diversity anyway, which sort of tacitly addresses these types of topics. So this was originally first discussed, I think, by me at the table way back in November 20th, 2020, when we were looking at possibly including it in the budget, and then it's come full circle another 2 times. And you'll hear about the specific timetable from Chip. That's a quick synopsis for the moment. At this point, with the board's understanding, I'll bring Chip into the room and give him the opportunity with Eric to field any questions, and anything that comes out of this, certainly we can talk about that too, and the questions that we have supplied the answers for. I hope one of the questions I know is like the timing of this. It's always the right time to do what's right for kids, in my opinion. And I think this district expects that we can pivot, expects the highest standards, expects that we can continue with the work. And I think we should and can continue the work, and we should continue with this particular program. But with that, I will introduce, if he's on the screen, Eric, are you there? And Dr. DeMay, are you there?
I am here.
Eric, thank you for joining us. Chip, thank you for joining us. Mr. Chairman, if you want to lead us off with questions, or you would like them to start, that's fine too.
Sure. Thank you for that presentation and update. I think it would be appropriate for Dr. Dumais or Mr. Nyquist, if there's anything you want to add to the presentation that's just been done, and then we can open it up to board comments. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Dumais, to start.
So the presentation was certainly complete. There are a couple of elements.
Could I ask you to speak up just a little bit? Thank you.
Certainly.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. The presentation was complete. We did provide information ahead of time to make sure that as many questions as possible were answered. Eric, would you like to explain the selection process? That's one area where we could provide some clarity.
Sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, thanks for having us here tonight so we can answer any of your questions. The process that we select by, I know there's been confusion over the term lottery. And the fact of the matter is it does start with a lottery, which is, I guess, where the confusion has come in. It starts with a lottery. We put anybody who would like a spot, who has applied for a spot in a particular grade level. If we don't have enough spots for everybody that has applied in, let's pick kindergarten, we don't have enough spots for everybody. So we do a lottery, and it's a straight out lottery. It's a computer generated lottery. Once we get that number, we then look at the makeup of the group to make sure that it's reflecting the demographics of the sending district, so that we're, I know there is concern about, that it won't serve the purpose of the program, but we make sure that it does based on that lottery. But then we make sure that the group that we're going to send to Darien or to whatever district matches or exceeds the demographic goal of the program based on the sending district. I hope that that helps clear that up a little bit.
So Mr. Nyquist, could you just, I guess, the open choice program application is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. So, the way it's proposed here in Darien, it's a kindergarten start. And so our neighbors in Norwalk complete the application and send it in. Who's part of the process once it moves out of the lottery to looking at the demographics and does it fit the program? Is it a group of folks from Norwalk and from CES? Like, what is that comprised of in terms of that next step in looking at the applicants to come up with whatever number we agree to if we're participating?
Sure, that's a great question. The fact is, to be very, very honest with you, it has never really come up in the Bridgeport region. We've never had to dig into the numbers because the numbers come out, because the vast majority of students who apply for this opportunity fit the precise demographic that the program is intended for. Having said that, the group of people would be the group of people here at CES. That would be Dr. Dumais, myself, and our administrative assistant who works very closely with the open choice program. We would look at it to make sure that, again, it satisfies the goals of the program, that it does what it's intended to do. We would not be involving Norwalk in that decision-making process.
Thank you.
And by the way, you asked Dr. Dumais to speak up, so I feel like I'm shouting. If I'm shouting at you,
You're
please
fine.
let me know. Okay.
I will let you know if you're shouting too.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's just, we've got some audience members and we've got all our friends on Zoom. So I just want to make sure everything's clear. So thank you. I will open it up to board questions and comments. Mr. Sini.
Gentlemen, thanks again for joining us. And Dr. Hadley, what a great presentation. I think Mrs. Best put together some great questions, so I appreciate that.
Is your mic on, Mr. Sini?
So
That's better, thanks.
do we know the makeup of the Norwalk demographic? I think you used targeted demographic or some terms. So can you help us understand, if it falls short of that targeted demographic, what is the general makeup of the Norwalk school system?
So I do not have that information at my fingertips. I have reached out to Norwalk and I will get that. It will be based on this year's demographic.
And is that a racial demographic? Is it an economic demographic? Is it a, based on sex, boy or girl? I mean,
Currently, that is a racial demographic.
okay, thank you.
Sure.
Can I just,
Mrs. Worm.
so just by Google, right, the demographic is 25% white, 15% black, 4.6% Asian or Asia Pacific, 51% Hispanic Latino, and 16% would be English second language. Just
I have those numbers too. I didn't want to publicly use Google as my source. I've been waiting. Yeah, no, you can totally do that. I didn't want to do that, but that sounds fairly accurate to me.
That would be a great follow-up, though.
Yes. Yeah, I think we'd appreciate kind of a official view of that from a follow-up standpoint. Mrs. McCammon.
Related to that, the program as outlined has 3 criteria: racial, ethnic, and economic. So how are we, would the goals for Darien be different because of our location, or how is that being worked up through?
No, that's a wonderful question. The Hartford area uses the socioeconomic as part of their decision-making process. I'm going to be very honest with you that I started this position July 1st, and I am not somebody who wants to walk in and change 100 things all at once before I have a grasp of what's really important. So we are currently using the current system, which is the racial makeup of the demographic. However, I'm working with the folks up at CREC to determine that we may need to add in the socioeconomic component. I did not want to rush that and do that this year, as the applications were going out January 15th. So that is something we're looking at for future years.
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Mrs. Ackman.
Just given that we're asking for those stats, I guess my question would be, what as a board are we looking for? Because they're based on current year stats. So if those stats change year to year, our demographic group will change year to year. Are we saying that we would evaluate year to year based on the demographics, or what are we looking to learn by the demographics?
Are you asking
I
the
just- I
person
know
who
a
asked the
couple people
question,
asked
or I don't think the board had a view. If you want my opinion
think
as a board
yours
member.
I
or-
don't think, I
or
don't think
Tara,
I don't think we've discussed, I mean, we have not discussed it as a board, and the administration hasn't brought anything to us as a recommendation, so. I mean, we can-
I'm not opposed to it. I mean,
Yeah.
if John has an opinion or Mr.
Yeah.
I mean,
Jenkins-
it was
So I will-
proposed
I
as a
would-
diversity.
Right, it was posed
Tool.
to be part of our DEI program. So I'll throw the question back perhaps to you gentlemen, is how do the districts that are participating, how do they look at this program, and do they look at it, in terms of what demographics?
Again, I'm just going to tell you about the history as I know it, and that is that the vast majority of students who apply for the program happen to be students of color. And so we've never, and it's not to say that could maybe very, 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 very different with this new region that we're looking at. But the vast majority of students that apply happen to be students of color. So it does not, that the question that you're all grappling with, to the best of my knowledge, and my administrative assistant's been working with the program for over 10 years. And, we have not experienced the issue. I know that it could happen, so it's great that we're talking about it and making sure we have the plan so that it fulfills the goals of the program. But the vast majority of students that apply, we have over 800 applicants a year in Bridgeport. And it really does fit what the goals of the program are.
Anything you want to add, Dr. Adley, with relative to how we're looking at it in terms of our DEI program and strategy?
No, I just would be confident that the CES would be able to complement our student body and with the diversity that we're looking for. I'd be confident in that process. But if the board wants other information, we can certainly bring it to them.
Yeah,
Mr. Cini?
I was just going to say Bridgeport is a much different demographic than Norwalk, I'm imagining, and so is Hartford. So we're citing districts with significant differences in Norwalk. So again, follow-up, I think would be, follow-up would be appreciated for Norwalk, but I guess what I'm grappling with, you say the goal of the program is to match the demographics of the sending district, no matter what its demographics are, right? Is that what I'm gleaning from it? Because we don't have a goal as a board, as Tara's question, I think, meant, so.
No, I just,
Mrs. Ackman.
so we know what I was asking. I was being very clear in the sense that if we're asking CES to say, provide us with Norwalk's demographics, I'm asking, how is that helping us make our decision of whether to go forward with this program? And maybe it's just informational. I'm not saying it's bad information to have, but given that, and someone could correct me if I'm here, I'm going to guess that Darien is 98% Caucasian, 96, I think, I forget our last report. Norwalk has different demographics than we do, so by default, it meets a criteria of DEI. So we could get different demographics, and they might be very informational and help us just to know. But I'm asking, how does that help us make a decision? I'm not against receiving it. I'm just asking what we're doing with the information when we receive it.
I'll open that up to board
I
questions or
think,
comments. Mrs. Worm?
I think it is informational, right? They mentioned that they look at sending district and the demographics of the sending district and to mirror that. So if, just looking to see that we were looking for diversity, if 25% of their students are white, does that mean we're going to end up with 25% of that number, whatever that number is, to be white students? So that was just I think that was where that information is coming from or looking at. Just at this moment, it's just information gathering, I believe.
Mrs. Best.
Thank you. And I might add that it might be interesting to look at this information for sure, but I would stress again that if our goal or one of our goals is diversity, that it's important to keep in mind the ethnic and the socioeconomic as well. And while it sounds like that hasn't historically been what's been reviewed, if there's any way for us to get a better handle on that or to have some better understanding of what broader diversity this program would bring to our district, I think that would be interesting to look at.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Best. Mrs. McCammon.
I have a different question. Wanted some clarification on the transportation component of the discussion. I did not understand. My understanding was that more was to come in a few minutes. So.
Sure, I can address, there's two separate things. First of all, the first piece of the transportation is getting kids to and from school, right? And that is totally handled by our office. It is paid for by the state. It is coordinated by my office. And we make sure that kids get to and from school. The second part of the equation is the more challenging part, and that is whether to provide for high school students extracurricular transportation, right? Now, in the original state statute, it says that the state will provide that transportation. However, we all know that the state sometimes says they're going to do something but doesn't fund it. And that's where there is a gap that I am trying to clarify with the state. And I know that's not the answer you want. You want a very specific, solid answer from me, but I am working with the state, which is sometimes slow in getting back. But I want to find out, since it's in the state statute, if I can push to make that happen. Currently, I can tell you in Bridgeport that most districts do not provide extracurricular transportation, but Westport does, and they have been for more than 10 years. They provide the transportation, a single bus out, after school hours. They're not going to, nobody, the state or an individual district is going to be expected to supply a bus at 4 o'clock for one rehearsal and 5 o'clock for a practice and 7:30 for the late practice. But, obviously, and that's what we're trying to work with the state to find out, because we want students who are in this program to be immersed in the district that they're in. We want them to have all the opportunities that a district like Darien offers. And so that is unfortunately, to answer your question, not clear from the state at this moment. I applaud Darien for looking at that issue and saying, we want to make that work somehow, some way. And my office is working with the state right now to try to find out and get clarification on whether that can happen and whether it will for the coming year. And I'd be happy to report back to you as soon as I know.
So
did that answer your question even in some way?
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mrs. McCammon, could you give some your thoughts or feedback on the number of students and the starting at the kindergarten age? Are there other districts that start at different ages?
Sure. I would say the vast majority of our districts start in kindergarten or first grade. The reason being is I think most districts, want to get, kids when they're young and immerse them in the culture of that district, and allow the students not to have too many transitions in their lives. If they come in kindergarten, they are Darien students, and they know that. They feel like they are Darien students. If they come in say 7th or 8th grade, middle school is a tough enough time for any kid without a transition. To add a transition like, a major transition in is more difficult. It's not to say we don't have those occasions arise. And I will tell you that we get applicants from every grade level, from kindergarten right on up through 11th grade, with parents hoping that their child's senior year will be in another district. But the vast majority of districts that we work with prefer to start the kids when they're in kindergarten or first grade, so that they can have them for the long haul, and they can get them accustomed to all of the things that are part of your school system. And just to let you know, we get, and I asked my administrative assistant, who has many more years of experience, she said, we never get kids who decide after being in the program to leave the program. The only time we have kids exit the program is when they move, right? So if they move from Bridgeport or Norwalk, they're no longer eligible to be in the program. That's the only reason. Other than that, our kids go straight on through high school graduation.
Can you just add to that, as we think through this, we are a destination town in terms of our education, our commute into New York. We have been recognized recently for what we're doing in terms of thoughtful development in town. We have the potential for a lot more people and a lot more students to come to town. So, a big question from a community standpoint is, so we may have seats available this year, but we may not have seats available next year. So what's the viability of participating in something like this, where we can do X amount this year, but we see a ramp up in home sales and retirees leaving for families of 5, and we have 300 plus units coming online over the next couple of years. And
Sure.
So, how does it look, or what's the value of saying we can do 16 this year, we can do 0 next year, the following year, maybe we can do 4. It just seems a little too all over the map to make it really effective.
Sure. Well, I will tell you that for those 16 kids, I think it's very valuable. And I think for the 16, for the hundreds of kids in Darien that those 16 kids get to know and get to be friends with, I think it's incredibly valuable. And I would expect you as a board every year to evaluate whether the program is working for you or not. And so the only thing that you're guaranteeing is that you're going to keep those 16 or 18 or 12, whatever number you come up with. The only thing you're guaranteeing is that you're going to take care of them until they graduate high school. You're not guaranteeing me one more person after this year. It's just not how it works. And we have some districts that go up every year, and some districts that, have gone up for 3 years. And now they say, well, this particular year, we know we're going to have a lot of kids in kindergarten, so they don't take as many. That doesn't take away from the value of the program for the kids that are in it, or for the kids that they come into contact with.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. I'm interested from an educational point of view, if CES or maybe Dr. Adley or any of the principals have an educated opinion as to what the appropriate number would be. And is there an appropriate number? Is it better to have a larger cohort of these children each year, or does it matter? I would just love to have a educated, factual idea of what is the best practice for this.
I'll take that question if I can. So it also depends on, in some cases, what a district's position is in terms of if a district felt that bringing in open choice students to the district was so valuable that it would break sections for it, then you could take a position of, we would take, I'll make it up, 10 students because we've only got this many schools and this many classes and so on and so forth. So you could make that decision, and regardless of enrollment, you would decide to do that because it's the right thing to do for our kids. You could also, many of the surrounding areas, actually those that are most successful too, also do it based on not breaking sections for the most part. So you could do that. We have a diversity goal. There's no point just sprinkling, and not participating in good faith, or maybe not the right terminology, but it would, I would ask us to not back into it if we can. If class sizes was an issue, I would say, okay, well then where we have identified for the 16 coming in where we would trip class size maybe in 2025, 26. Okay, well then let's address that and take out the four students if that was the case and do the 12. We put in 16 because we thought that was important for the schools to participate. And I would stand by that. But if the board was concerned about tripping the class, I could also understand that. And 12 would seem to be a reasonable. Look, I think there's research to support that students who have fellow students of their own race in the classrooms, that's a better scenario, right? If not that, then within the school. So, I mean, it's not, we can implement it with certain considerations.
Mrs. Ackman.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here tonight. My question has to go, we've heard a lot about finances in town. And there's a concern that the program will cost more. I mean, we've seen projections anywhere from 5 million to 1 million. We've heard from our finance director, that's not the case in his experience. We've heard from a board of finance member who's a finance director at a school that that's not his experience in the case. Dr. Adley has presented us with much lower costs and actually saying that we'll have a revenue actually come in. What has been your experience in the programs you know? Have districts incurred high costs because of participating in open choice?
I'm just going to answer very bluntly. If they did, they wouldn't still be involved. I mean, you know, as big as a district's heart is, and as much as they think they want to do what's right for all students, if they're you know, spending inadequate amounts of money, inordinate amounts of money on a program that is not supposed to cost them a lot, they wouldn't still be involved. And you know, just this year we had a district add 30 seats at the beginning of the year. They think the program is working great. They like the way it's being run, and so they added 30 seats. So you know, there are costs of educating any child, but those costs jump up, as I think was just pointed out, if you tip and have to add a teacher. When you have to do that, when you have to add a classroom, that's where those costs come up. But adding a student here or there, adding 16 students is not going to multiply out by the per student expenditure. As I think you all understand that. I will tell you that I have just not had any conversation with any districts that are telling me, wow, this is costing more than we thought it was going to. They're just not. That's just not. The conversations I have with districts are, the kids are on the bus for a long time. You know, if they're going from Bridgeport to Westport and there's traffic, that's the conversations I have with districts. It's not about the finances. So, you know, I'm not a financial expert, and you know, I'll leave that to the people in Darien who know it better than I do. But the costs don't seem to be a problem for the districts that have been involved for all of these years that the program's been running.
Mr. Rudel, anything you want to add? You know the program, you know our fixed costs, you know the constant conversation about this is going to cost us what our per pupil student cost is, but we are talking about empty seats based on, you know, our class size. So anything from a finance end you want to add to that?
So, I mean, just what was said, providing you don't break a section, it's really your direct cost. So your consumables, your materials, any technology like a Chromebook, things like that, those are really your direct costs. Everything else that makes up part of that per pupil, whether it's teacher salaries, special education costs, special education transportation or utilities, those are really all fixed costs. Those aren't going to change if you add incremental students. It's only going to change if you actually tip a section. And so that's where your large costs are coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Rudel. Mrs. Worm.
I actually have a couple questions. One, back to the bus situation. You spoke about high school and that you were going to check on that. So that means that there would not be a late bus ever for like middle school, elementary. It just,
Yeah, not according to the state, not, the state will not provide that. It's not to say that Darien couldn't, but the state does not provide for that. It says in the statute for high school extracurriculars.
And also two more things. The students, and this might not be a question for you, I'm not sure about the English as a second language learners. Is that considered special education, or is that a cost that we take on? Not sure who answers that.
So what is your experience in the program with students where English is a second language?
I would be answering a question that I don't truly have the answer to. I know that we have many English language learners in our program. The districts work with each other to determine the costs that it is costing. If you think it's going to cost X amount and Norwalk disagrees and is going to refuse to pay for that, that goes to the state. The state makes a determination. It's the reasonable cost, the reasonable costs up to that $4,000 that you would get as a grant. Anything beyond that, you are able to charge back to Norwalk. Now, whether the state would consider English language learners to need more than that cost, that I couldn't answer that for you, to be very honest, and I don't want to speculate.
And then my last question was just, you mentioned there was a district that added 30 seats. Could you tell us what district that is?
Dr. Dumais, am I okay to do that?
Certainly.
Sure, that's Fairfield. Fairfield added 30 more seats this year.
Thank you.
Sure.
To Mrs. Worm's question, which is a good question, as we've seen an increase in English language learners. If those students come to the district and the costs associated with that would have to go up over and above the $4,000 grant before we would then negotiate with Norwalk as to a reimbursement on those costs. In other words, they feel that grant encompasses some of that programming that we might need to do for these students. That's basically what the grant is for.
Yeah, well, yes, and the grant is an incentive, of course, but it also is meant to cover educational costs. It specifically talks in the statute about special education costs, because as we know that those can be quite hefty. And so it talks in the state statute, it talks about reasonable special education costs after whatever grant you get can be billed back to the sending district.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mrs. Blackman.
It's much like tipping a section. We talked about this because we had so many students that needed it, that do we need to add someone? So costs would be included, but it's like teaching a section. You don't pay $1,000 for your English, each
Correct.
student for their English as their second language teacher. This board would have to discuss, are we adding an FTE? But that we did that 3 years ago at this board with all Darien students. So it's not a special education cost. Being English as a second language learner, you're not in special ed. It's just like a teacher because they're just general ed students.
Correct, and I don't think through the program, Chip, that it's directly reimbursable, so therefore what Mrs. Ackman says is correct.
That was the answer to the question. I was
And
looking for.
So happy to provide.
Okay, thank you for that clarity around that. Mr. Sini.
Is English as a second language, is that something that we'll learn in the demographic breakout of Norwalk that we asked for?
You could get, yes, you can get that.
Okay. Second, if you,
I'm sorry, but it will not be a determining factor whether the student is accepted or not.
okay,
Just wanted to clarify that.
no, but I'd be interested to understand if just the ratio, so we'd have to understand whether or not we tripped any LL.
Well, out of the 16, if
Yes,
the 4 that come here, we need that additional person, and based on our current enrollment and numbers we have, it could lead to another FTE.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, thank you. That's where I was going. Appropriate services, is that the same definition that we use for our own students? Shirley, do you know, or anybody?
Go ahead.
I think the term was reasonable. Was it they're using on the notion of reasonable services? So reasonable services, once you come to the $4,000 mark, you would bill back the district. I have checked with other districts that do participate, and they have not had any difficulty reimbursement for those services above the reasonable services.
Right, so Alan's memo said appropriate services. So are we swapping appropriate and reasonable as synonyms or?
In the past, I've said there hasn't been, to my knowledge, right? And I've been a participant in the program for 20 years. Any problem of getting reimbursement. I think in the whole of experience that I've ever had, there was one dispute with Hartford that didn't last long at all.
Okay.
Right? So
I'm just trying to understand, it would be the same thresholds for special services that we would use
yes,
for our own
yes,
districts.
yes,
Thank you.
yes, yes.
The other question, if maybe we could get a little more color at what happened in Danbury, because that Danbury and Norwalk were, I think, the newest districts that were
Correct.
added to the program. So if I could get a little more detail, what happened in Danbury?
Dr. DeMay, do you want to talk to that?
Sure. So in the Norwalk area, you already have a couple of communities that are participating. Weston and Westport, who participate in Bridgeport, are closer to Norwalk and will be shifting some of their newer students towards that. So you already had two towns that are participating. Danbury, the surrounding towns, one because of enrollment and the potential for breaking those sections, is not participating in the first year. Another district that is in the process of redesigning their elementary school structure and building a new building is not in a position to take on additional students this time. One of the communities chose not to participate, and we're still waiting to hear on two others. At this point, there's not a critical mass that would put us in a position where providing transportation would be reasonable at this point. So we're going to push out Danbury one more year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sini. Mrs. Ackman.
When would the lottery occur, and really, I guess I'm not looking for the exact lottery, when would Darien be notified of the students joining us next school year?
So, there's a difference between ideally and practically. Ideally, we would find out from districts on March 15th dutifully that they have so many seats available. But we know that it just never happens. People are still dealing with budgets at that time. They're still trying to get a grasp on their enrollments. And so I've put out to Darien, when I was asked this question, that May 15th would be the day that we would need your final, your number by. And really, honestly, that's generous. I would like it before then. March 15th is the general deadline, but we can work with it if it's May 15th. What happens is as soon as we get commitments from the districts, the second we get a commitment from a district that fourth grade has availability in their district, we run the fourth grade selection process. So I hate to use the term rolling, but it rolls as districts tell us, what they're offering. Once Darien tells me how many seats, if any, that they're going to provide us next year, we will do the lottery immediately, because the fact is that that the applications are due by March 15th. And so we will know what our pool of students is by then, and then we will run it. We will run the selection process. So my goal would be, and I'm Dr. Dumais is going to yell at me for giving this, but I would say by June 1st would be my goal for telling you, provided that you let me know by May 15th. I would think that by June 1st, I should be able to give you.
So my point in asking the question is that by then our budget is set. And so whether it's ESL or other than setting sections, which we do, at the end of July, right? We set sections at that July meeting. But by then, our budget is set. Come July 1, our budget is done. So whether it's English as a second language learner, or we've already determined what our staff is, which we have our flexibility of budget control. But I guess, again, as we ask for information, I guess my question is, what are we doing with it? We won't know who will have what needs until we know our students. And at that point, we've accepted them as our students and we'll meet their needs. And so you're talking, the summer. At that point, our budget deliberations are over and the town has hopefully approved our budget.
Well, I think also, and Rich, could you just remind us, I mean, the kindergarten over the last couple of years, sometimes that enrollment drags out. And it's almost, we're looking at it at every board meeting over the course of the summer. So traditionally, when have you kind of really firmed up that kindergarten enrollment?
So usually the board doesn't set sections until early August.
Right. Okay.
Just for the record, all right, to kiss my board thinks I'm crazy here. The original date we got for the seat request was April 15th, and then the final one was May 15th. Just, no, not that it changes too much, but.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, sorry. I have a couple questions going back to the presentation. So there was the term bonus grant, and it's a one-year bonus grant. Is that a one-time bonus grant, or is that in every year there's the $1,000 bonus?
First year of the pilot.
Go ahead.
The first year of the pilot.
Just the first year. So it's a one-time, one-year bonus. Okay. So then the cost is only $3,000 every other year, other than the kindergarten. Okay. And then my other question, Dr. Adley, was on your cost graph. You have, and I just scratched down some numbers, but the first year the cost is $2,200 for 16, and then the next year it goes to $6,500 for 12. And I don't understand how you got to that number.
Rich, can you someone bring that slide up?
Oh, sorry. So it is the cost of technology. So we do have enough Chromebook tablets for the proposed 16. So the expectation in the future is if more students are added, you are going to have to purchase additional K2 tablets.
I'm sorry, but then why is the second cohort 49 for 12 and it's 22 for 16? Wouldn't they be going into kindergarten? They wouldn't have technology?
So the first cohort, you would end up having to buy replacement K2 tablets. And so then as you go forward, you're also going to have to buy the Chromebooks. So the second cohort, which you see is the 4920, includes the cost of materials, consumables, things like that, plus the K2 tablets again, then Chromebooks, and then Chromebooks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maroney. Mrs. McCammon.
Just a technical question back on special ed. I'm curious to know who owns the IEP, one, and two, related to that, if we have a particularly challenging case, and challenging maybe in a blessed way, and we end up with an outplacement situation or a suit that's brought to the district, how are those lines handled? Is everything handled within Darien, or?
Sure. So the IEP is Darien's IEP. They're a Darien student. Very often the sending district will send a representative to the PPT to just be there, to be a presence to hear the situation. But again, an outplacement would be one of those. An outplacement is certainly going to cost more than $3,000. So that would be billed back to the district, to the sending district.
I did speak to one of the districts that are participating, and that goes beyond reasonable costs. And yes, they pay for the out of district, or if a paraprofessional was needed, that goes beyond reasonable costs also. And they would provide the funding for that.
I want to make sure I haven't missed your hand up. Are you good?
All good, Duke. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, David. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, a question on siblings, and question would be, how do other districts handle siblings of children admitted into the program, if at all?
So siblings get priority. It's in the legislation, it's in the statute. The goal would be to keep siblings together. Ideally, in a perfect world, in the same school, if not that, in the same district. And if not that, then they have to go to school in their home district and their sending district. But if you accept a kindergartner this year and next year they have a sibling who's going into kindergarten and you have a kindergarten spot, they do get priority. Again, we want to keep families together.
How does that work in, I don't know, I know it's the reverse, that if you apply, are you allowed to apply as a kindergartner and you have a second grader? What happens to the second grader?
Well, that if you had a second grade spot that you gave us, they would get priority.
But we would have to give that.
You always have to give it. There's never a time ever. There is never ever a time where my office or the state says to you, you must do this. You must take this student. It just doesn't work that way. And so if you had second grade spots available, by miracle, well, then that student in second grade, because their brother or sister's in kindergarten, could get that priority seat. But no, you would not be forced to, or we would not say, well, you have to take them because their sibling goes to Darien. It just doesn't work like that. We have many families who are split, who have one child in say Westport, and the other child, because there were no spots given by Westport, they're at their sending district. They're still in Bridgeport, or they make another option. They make another choice for the child. But we do give priority because we want to keep families together. So if you give us a vacancy, a seat, and there is somebody who applies that's a sibling of another Darien student, we do give it to them. They get preference.
But if I use the word force, I apologize. I did not mean to use force. My question would be, though, if you apply with a kindergartner, how does the process work if there is a child with, so Tommy comes in as a kindergartner, but Joey is a second grader. Do you let us know that Joey has applied as a second grader, or does he only come in if we say we have a second grade spot open? Are there other people who want to come in? It's a little wonky, but
Typically, what would happen, I guess, would be the CMSC. SCS would give me a call and say, would you be interested in taking the sibling? And generally, if the board has approved that type of selection to the superintendent or not, then it's either we would consider it or we wouldn't.
okay.
And I've had both of those scenarios play out. We've called a district and said, hey, we have a sibling. Would you happen to have an extra spot? And they said, the superintendent calls me back in 2 days and says, nope, I checked on it. We just don't have the room. I've had other situations where the superintendent calls me back and said, we actually do have room. We'd be happy to take the sibling. We love the family. We're happy to have the brother.
Thank you.
Dr. Adley, please excuse me. I have a class that's started a couple minutes ago.
Thank you, Dr. Dumais. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Dr.
you participating and helping us with questions. Thank you.
Good luck with the class.
Any additional board questions, comments? Mrs. McCammon.
Are there any measurement criteria you're using, whether they're academic or otherwise, for you to feel like the program is successful from the CES or legislative point of view?
Sure. Well, I started in July, so a longitude study has not been undertaken yet. And I'm not saying that facetiously, but to be very honest, the state has done a study using test scores, but it's limited. And I did share it with folks in Darien. I'd be happy to share it with anybody here who would like me to share it. It's a very easy document to share. It does show that students who are in the open choice program not only did better up front, but over the course of time grew exponentially more than their counterparts who stayed back in the sending district. But I'm going to be very, very honest with you. It's not a big enough study for me to put my flag into and say, this is the end all and be all. It's just not. It's a study that was done in 2015 based on scores, I think it was 2015, based on scores from 2010 and 2012. The other thing that I can go by is the fact that when students get into the program, they graduate from the schools that they go to. I did try to find information, to be very honest. I tried to find information about, success after high school. Did they go to 4-year colleges? Did they go to the military? Did they go to 2-year? The state has not undertaken to find that data at this point. So part of my new job is that I'm going to try to collect that data. What I can tell you is that as I've looked back over the last 8 years, and that's about as far back as I could really grapple with the data, it's been really successful. Students go and they do well. I just had a mom in the other day whose son was a valedictorian of the school that he went to. And I said, so did the program work for him? And she said, I have no doubt. She said he wouldn't have been inspired to do what he did if he weren't surrounded by these other students who are all driven and motivated and had that support at home. She said it was so helpful to him, and he was the valedictorian and he went to college on a full ride. So I know that's anecdotal rather than hard data, but the state doesn't have, they have that one study and it's positive. But the data that I am going by right now is the parents that I talk to, the fact that so many of the people who apply have siblings already in the program. Again, if they weren't happy with the program, if they found it to not work for them, they wouldn't apply for their younger child to go. But instead they apply and they call us and say, I want to make sure you know that their sibling is in the program. And I think we get priority because I'm so love the school. I really want my younger child to have the same experience. So I wish that there was hard data, long studies that have been done, but I don't find that information currently. So I will be working on that myself.
Thank you. Mrs. Parent.
I just like to do the inverse a little bit. So it's we've seen, or we're hearing that it's successful for the sending district students. How do we measure success from our side? And how I know that once open choice students are in the district, they're Darien students, but for the Darien students who reside in Darien, how can we measure the success of this program?
So whether we have an EL student, and I don't say this, I say this sincerely, actually, any diversity.
That's a great question.
Of diversity. Sorry?
I think that's a very great question.
No.
What's happening?
I don't know.
I believe he said that he thought the question was great.
Thank you.
As I cited in one of the studies, the idea of going to school, learning with, playing with, growing up with, engaging with a diverse community has been proven to be beneficial for all students.
I mean, I will just say anecdotally again, every single education class that I've sat in, whether undergraduate or graduate, has taught me that being in a diverse classroom, whether it's diversity of thought, diversity of skin color, diversity of religion, diversity of whatever, is a better place for any person to be in. That's what I'm going on.
Thank you, Mrs. Parent. Mrs. Best.
Thank you. Mr. Nyquist, I know it wouldn't be hard data, but for example, when a district like Fairfield calls you and says they would like to bring in 30 more students this year, do they cite reasons that they are asking to increase their participation?
They did not, other than they told me that the program is working great and they believed they had seating capacity to add 30 more students. There are incentives for districts. The more students you add, the higher the state pays you per student. So the practical side of me thinks that, that probably had something to do with the number that they arrived at. As a percentage of your whole population, that's where the number goes up. But I wasn't here when they made that call, so I really couldn't speculate as to why. But again, I can extrapolate that if it wasn't working for them, they would never have given us 30 more seats and asked for 30 more students to come.
Mrs. Best, I think just for a bit of color to that question is that they're also responding to a state plan for racial imbalance. So I think there's an extra incentive or an extra requirement or combination thereof that has an influence there.
Dr. Adley, that's true. I am not aware that that number helped them specifically with that. I know that that's why they have been involved in the program. So I appreciate you adding that. Thank you.
Additional board questions or comments? All right, anything else you wanted to add, Dr.
Adley? If we're signing off, Eric, I'll say thank you to Eric and for his participation this evening. If the board would like to go through the open choice questions, or do you feel as if
we'll open it up. If we're done with Eric Nyquist, I will say thank you very much for helping us out this evening and answering those questions. We appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
You're very welcome. And just so you know, anybody on the board who has further questions, go to the Open Choice website and my information is there. I'd be happy to answer any more questions. And I will get back to you on the questions that were posed that I did not have direct answers for immediately. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.
Have a good evening. Thank you. I will open it up to the board to continue with any questions or comments relative to the questions that have been answered that have come up through the budget process. So those questions have all been answered in the package. So any additional questions around these questions that have been answered, or any additional questions you'd like the administration to, over and above what we discussed tonight, want to add?
I will say that under number 3, I'm not bypassing stuff here. I've just I think number 1 and number 2 talks to either running through 16 students or running through a cumulative 16 and then 12 and so on and so forth. I will say that Fairfield, Westport, Weston, having talked to all the superintendents, New Canaan, Wilton, the Fairfield, Westport, and Weston are very strong supporters of it, are advocates for it. I will also say that I can't speak to any particular, but honestly, I'm not sure that there's a professional will to do it in some places. And I do think that the social climate we're working in is influencing that too. That's unsaid, and I'm not talking about any particular district, but I'm just thinking that there is some of that, and I hope we don't let that interfere with our decision making as we go. But again, Fairfield, Westport, and Weston think the program enriches the whole school community.
Dr. Adley and Rich, we are looking at in our budget a Malone and McBroom demography report for the upcoming year, which wouldn't be done probably much until October in terms of how those programs work. So, I think a big question from the community, question from the board is, this is a town, it's a destination for education, it's a destination to live, it's a destination to commute. We've got a lot of these developments coming online. And I know over the years, we've built those developments into our enrollment projections. You've recently worked with Town Hall to get updates on when those projects are coming online, the amount of bedrooms that are involved. There's even a question I heard today, those apartments that have showers versus bathtubs, which makes a difference in terms of people that may come live in those apartments. So I think it's important for the community and the board to hear that, when looking at our enrollment projections and taking into account those developments that we know are approved, coming out of the ground, some people are already talking the leases, that is how you're coming up with, number one, that we want to participate. You're recommending to participate in this program, but we know our numbers. We are not interested in tipping classes or changing our class size. It's a real value to how we deliver education from our local community neighborhood feel elementary schools on up to the high school. So just a little more color on the time and energy that's been spent on the enrollment numbers.
Sure, they were included in the 2020, and then Rich, you want to talk about some of those discussions?
So we do factor in the new developments. We do work with Jeremy Ginsberg over in planning and zoning to get an idea of the breakdown of studios or 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, et cetera. So when we look at the enrollment projections for next year, the schools that we're recommending adding 4 students in, based on the enrollment projections, have a capacity nearly 3 times of what we're recommending. So even if the projections are off by a little bit, you still won't likely tip a class section. So if you have 14 students, let's say, of capacity, we're saying we'll take 4, it still leaves you with essentially wiggle room of 10, should you actually see an influx of additional students from some of those new developments.
Mrs. Worm.
So aren't there some of those buildings aren't approved yet, though, all of the apartments? The planning and zoning is still going through that process. So we don't really know exactly what we're dealing with, correct?
So it's just the approved ones that are in the pipeline.
Do we know which buildings have been approved and which haven't been approved, or do we have any idea?
We know the ones that have been approved. So like Corbin's been approved, Federal's been approved, Palmer's has been approved. So there's a few of them that have been approved.
So still no Parklands?
Correct.
Anything else? Or is it just
Parklands hasn't been approved yet by planning and zoning.
right.
So,
That's what I
but
mean.
the developments, this came up at OPC meeting last week, the developments that have been approved and are coming out of the ground are built in. Those other developments that are not approved yet have not been built in and would have to be built in as soon as we know they're approved and understand the timeline.
Is that just Parklands though, or is there something else?
My understanding is the only thing that's on the map right now is Parklands, which I think is 60 some odd units. And again, I'm not sure the makeup of studio versus 1 and 2 bedrooms. So, but yeah, to that point in your question, we're a town in development. I mean, and so the minute another project comes online or gets approved, we need to understand the timeline of ground up and leases being signed so that we can continue to build that into the enrollment projections. Mr. Senior.
And Duke, if the board does decide to go through, I mean, I think we should consider whether or not, Royal is the destination for Federal, which is the first project that's coming online. I believe they're going to start they'll probably put some units, residents in some units by this fall. So I heard today on a podcast, but so I think we should consider, if we do decide to go forward, we make adjustments maybe around, or consider adjustments around Royal, for instance, or, so just think strategically of the others, where these new developments are sending children also to have an extra layer of safety.
So have you for the current year, you've taken into consideration those schools and where people may start to be?
Yeah,
They
so
start to
actually
live.
Royal is not included, even though the second line on these questions say that Royal is, no matter how many times you read these questions.
All right, so wait, I'm sorry.
It's Royal is not included.
Okay, so the budget book has the correct.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Senior. Mrs. Achman.
So I wonder when we ask those questions, and forgive me if my numbers are wrong, Mr. Sini may know better, because we talked about these numbers when he was chairman over at P and Z. I think what's estimated is something like, 1.25 kids or 1.3 kids, I can't quite remember, in certain units. But we did never ask the same question of homes being built, 5-bedroom homes, who are we filling those with? So again, I think as we're looking at data, like what kind of data are we looking to collect? We can look at units and 16 units and 1.5 kids, but then we also should, at least if we're going to ask the question, ask, what do we look at empty 5-bedroom homes? Or what are we, if we're going to use that kind of purchasing to determine whether we have room for this, you would have to really do this, map it across town. If on the other hand, you're saying our projection enrollments have held and we've had them right for the past year, since I've been on the board and beyond, we've had a couple of years that were wonky, and we will evaluate this year to year because we embrace the program. I think that's a different, again, I think we have to come to a decision on a board of whether we feel this is a value of the town. We can ask for stats from here until tomorrow. Will they help us make a decision on this program. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind as we deliberate.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. So the 16, I just want to get a little more clarity of why you chose the 16. Did you say, I want to get to 95% of max capacity? Or, I'm just trying to think going forward, how we do this year after year. Are we going to take up to X to get us to 95%? I'm just pulling that number out of the hat. But how do we know, what are we looking to aim for?
All right, so we haven't capped out at the max by any means, and the 4 in each of the school was relatively 1 for each grade level. Or I did say with some flexibility, it might be 2 kids in a class and another 2 kids in a class, because there is some logic and argument to actually have company in some capacity. And also what we would do is what we do now when we place kids and we look at each individual need and you come up with a class list. So it wouldn't preclude that, but essentially it was where we could put a child in each section, we would do that.
So, and to the point of the 16 in your previous comment there, so with the 16, we still have capacity in terms of number of seats in classrooms based on enrollment projections. Because last year we had 41 kids show up for
So based
Oxbridge.
on, based on the board's class size guidelines and the number of sections, we're at the elementary level, you're about 85% capacity. It varies by kindergarten, first, et cetera. But you're about 85% capacity, but you would still have room.
Thank you, Mr. Rudel.
So that still have room before tipping? Is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay, just clarifying.
So, Mr. Rudel, to Tara Ackman's question, the mammographer, when they get on the ground, they look at home sales, I don't know, do they get into the fact that a retired couple moved out and a family of 5 moved in? Like, do they try to get as much of that data?
So
as
they try to
possible?
get as much real estate data as they can in
Right.
terms of units sold. If they can get information on, what families moved in, they'll try to get that. So they look at turnover, they look at birth rates, anything that could affect the projection.
Thank you.
A quick question, Rich. Sorry, following up on the averages, about 85%. Like that doesn't actually play out evenly across schools because we could be 85% on average, but if you have one that's one student away from a tipping point, it's still an 85% average. Now we have a new section, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So we have any idea on how to calculate that, how close we get to the tipping point for sections?
So the one area that's closest to tipping is Royal, especially in kindergarten. So that's actually, within a few sections or a few students from tipping. When you look at Hindley, Holmes, and Oxford primarily, those are the ones that are closer to that 85.
So I guess the 85 may not be that useful as a guide. It really is on a case by case.
It really is case by case and grade by grade.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Maroney.
But to that point as well, we're not tied to doing 4 kids for each school. If one school is at 100% or 98% capacity, you may move 7 kids to Holmes and only 2 to Royal, correct?
If it made sense to do that,
Okay.
yeah, we would consider, we would certainly want to make sure that the enrollment is appropriate, right? And yeah, we would do that.
This is best.
Thank you. Dennis actually asked my question, but just to clarify, so when you set the sections in August, if it's looking like you would have to break a section at a particular elementary school to accommodate the 4 students, you could shift and do 2 students at that elementary school and end up with 6 at another that had a little more room. Is that fair?
I just want to be, my hesitancy is not that that's not fair. I just want to make sure that
No, fair way to say it is what I mean.
as soon as we take a student and we commit to the student, it's the same way for one of our own students. I would hate to commit to a family and say you're in this school and then go, well, we're moving you completely to another school. With that sort of exception aside, we would make accommodations and try and balance out as best we could. So I'm a wee bit flexible on that question because I just would want to see what it actually plays out to be. But
So does that mean that in June, for example, when we find out which students would be coming to our district, those students would find out what school they would be coming to rather than what district they would be coming to?
well, they would find out relatively at the same time what what school the placement will be at. We may have a wee bit longer depending on processes.
Karen,
Would there ever be a time when, say you have a influx of 10 third graders and you reach a tipping point? Would the open choice students then be made to go to a different school?
Oh, I don't think we would do that, to be honest with you. I don't think we
That was
do.
the right
They are our students when they enter here. So we will treat them the same way as we'll treat them with as a Darien resident student.
Thank you.
Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, and maybe this is more of a question to our guests or that were here, but part of the appeal is that we have a neighborhood school. Do you try to would you try to build in students from Norwalk who reside in similar areas to keep them in similar schools?
Say the last part again, Dennis.
So we have neighborhood schools.
Yes.
Would you want to try to keep the students from Norwalk to be, someone from West Norwalk? Would you try to keep those 4 students to go to Royal? Someone from Rowayton, those 4 students would go to Tokenie? Or does it not matter?
Yeah, well, ultimately the enrollment would drive it and ultimately the transportation. But since the Darien has been granted permission to participate in the program, any school in Darien would be able to take them to any school. I don't think we would.
But would you try to keep because that, to me, it's kind of the neighborhood feel, and that would provide a neighborhood feel from that area as well, from the other district. My thought, and we don't have to have an answer.
Yeah, I
it's
don't
just
know
a
if
thought.
hopefully I'm understanding your question. Are you thinking that the students from Norwalk in some area are kept together? Is that what you're asking, or no?
Yes.
I think you mean that where Norwalk abuts Darien, there are some natural, almost neighborhood-like. So, there's on the border of North Darien and Norwalk. Would you send kids from that area of Norwalk to Royal or Oxford?
Potentially, because transportation plays a big part of it. So that in itself sort of defines neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Ackman.
So we had a question about, sorry, what happens? I lost it, but it's back. About, developments and what's sending schools. And as I understand it, you've mapped it out this year because we have incremental space at schools. But if we ever felt that a school was too crowded, we would redistrict, right? I mean, if we felt that the federal property was going to overwhelm Royal, we would redistrict. I mean, we did it with Avalon. Avalon students used to go to Holmes. We redistricted to Tokenique because Tokenique had space, Holmes didn't. So it actually would be the larger projects coming online that would determine districting more than 16 kids that you're really placing into slots that are open. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we have like large numbers of influxes of students impacting the school.
So the developments would drive that more than any student from open choice.
Well, certainly development would be more than 16 students, right?
Yeah.
So yes.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Any other questions or comments? All right. We will move on then. Thank you, everyone. Move on for further discussion on the bring your own device for the Darien High School. Dr. Adley and Mr. Tranberg.
So again, we'll walk through the presentation and Mr. Tranberg then can walk through the questions again together at the end, and we'll go from there. Just so. Thank you for your questions. Actually, some of the questions that we've answered tonight for open choice and so on included some of the RTMs and some of the committees that we got questions for. Anybody who made a question regarding open choice were included. So the same is to a lesser degree, I think, on the bring your own device.
Good evening, everyone. This first graphic is one that you have come to know over time. This was the implementation timeline for the one-to-one program with our first cohort graduating in 2020-21. I've also included along the bottom that 40 teachers have completed professional development over the past few years in the Vanguard program that specifically focused on developing their skills using Mac devices, whether those be MacBooks, Mac Airs, iPad Pros, and the use of those pencils. So we have 40 teachers that have had that training, and that's important for what's to come. So as far as the catalyst for the change, and I'll dig into these a bit throughout the presentation. One is something that we have talked about, speculated, heard from in a teacher focus group, and we'll see some data just about the implementation and the student usage. Another was regarding the staff feedback, integration with instruction, and the general message here will be things have changed and our knowledge and our skills have changed with how we can use technology over the past few years, especially. Personalization to the learner, giving the students the choice and the voice in their device, and then just the developmental appropriateness. So we talked about this a bit with the previous presentation, why not middle school, why not elementary school? High school students have the capacity to do this. And then, of course, allocation of resources, which is a cost savings in this budget. So as far as the instructional drivers, and I won't do every bullet here, I'll just pick a few highlights. The first will be a BYOD program at the high school really allow us to talk about instruction. I feel like we spent a lot of time together talking about devices, and it's been really hard getting to the instructional conversation. So feeling like we could implement a very high quality program without the iPads at the high school, that is certainly a driver for me instructionally. And the other piece that's really new in research is about the diversity of devices and how that can actually provide differentiated learning experiences for students in the classroom, because they can show their work on in different ways with different ecosystems. And one very simple example is presenting a slide deck with Google Slides versus a PowerPoint versus Keynote. There are different opportunities and different ways for students to show their work. And also they have different fluency because of the devices that they've come to know and use. And there's an obvious one of this device is faster, it's better. Why do I have to use my iPad has come into play. And the other is the Google, and we've heard this along the way, the Google apps in general don't necessarily interface as well as we would love them to with an iPad. Because while Google and iPads do work together, as you might imagine, it's not a match that has been designed to work super well for many reasons that you can guess. As far as the instructional model, we just wanted to include this as well because it's a big factor in the budget. So this is how classrooms and teacher devices work. The only actual change for next year is teachers getting Mac Airs. So we do have the 40 that have already received them through the Vanguard program. So the rest is equipping them with Mac Airs at the same time that the desktops have aged out. So this is not giving them another device on top of a device. This was the regular replacement cycle to replace those classroom devices. So this will just support the mobility of teachers between classrooms. And the iPad Pros, it just happens to be, it's the replacement year for those as well. So how we would transition out the end of this year would be the collection of the iPads and those pencils. And there's repurposing in several ways. One would be going to the iPad carts, which we would anticipate putting about 50% of the devices to carts for teachers to use and sign out for different classes and assign those by department. We'd like to send some to ELP, special education, and make sure the library is equipped with iPads as well, in case students forget a device, in case they need to sign out an iPad for some reason. Professional development would continue not only in the summer, but throughout the year for our staff. If there is a need, the families would work with a counselor to complete a waiver process, which is similar to what we do for other times when there's some considerations that are needed. And then in the fall, students would register their personal device and make sure it's equipped with all of the applications. So as far as what students have to do is they would bring a charged device to school every day. As always, adhere to our acceptable use policies, and then the counselor is a resource if there is a need. And again, we would make sure in case a student forgets or doesn't have a device, they would have access to one. This is also included in your questions, but these are the minimum specs for the different devices. One of the reasons we do want to keep 50% of the devices at this time is the secure browsers are required for testing, and that will be SATs for the first time, as well as AP testing. Then when we have NGSS, we need to use the secure browser, and there is no option as of right now to not have a school issued device for those reasons. We did have a focus group in December. We had about between 40 and 50 teachers, and there were some takeaways that ended up reflecting not only, I don't want to say what we've speculated, but we have had some speculative conversations, but what we've heard from students, what we've seen from students, what we've heard teachers say, and then the data from the survey reflected this. So the big one that I think you saw when you looked over is just the inconsistent use of those devices. So that was a big determining factor for us. The technology integration itself, it's just shifted. And I will not say it's because of the pandemic, but that was an opportunity where we learned how to use technology very differently and very often to enhance learning. So we know some more there. Students are very fluent with devices, especially the devices that they've chosen to use. And one of the pieces that the teachers anticipated, or they reflected in their conversations with students, the kids wanted a bigger screen. So I'm going to use my laptop because the screen's bigger than what I have on my iPad. This group also included members of the technology committee, all the department chairs, and at least 2 members of each department that were considered heavy tech users by their department chairs. So this just demonstrates the number of survey responses. We had 928, which represents about a 65% return, which is a nice return for a survey. And this also shows that relatively we have a normal distribution across grade levels, so the data is representative. Here, this is just finding out if students had another personal device other than the iPad. And as you can see, 86% of students do. And interestingly, of those 86%, 72% bring their other device to school on a regular basis anyway. This just does the breakdown of that data by grade level, which is represented similarly. Here, one that stood out for me on the first graph all the way to the left, that I need to use my iPad for learning. So we have 34% of students that say, I don't use my iPad at all for learning. That number jumps out for me. And then when you look at what devices students do use, you can see that we're a heavy Mac user community. And this is when you do use your iPad, what do you use it for? So that 57% would be for schoolwork. And then again, another number that jumps out is 37%. So if we've issued 1,400 iPads and 37% of them are sitting on a shelf, that's not a number that we really want to see. There was an open question of why do I use another device? And these were the top responses from the data. So that, again, that preference for the larger screen, the laptop that works much better with the keyboard than when it's an accessory to an iPad, speed, and then use of iPad for notability only. Notability is not only a note-taking program, but it's a way to annotate documents. So has high student usage. So those are the highlights of the BYOD transition.
Thank you, Mr. Tranberg. Appreciate that work and appreciate doing that survey and getting that information back to the board. I will open it up for board questions. Mr. Sini.
It's more of a comment. It looks like this policy, as you guys outlined it, is more of a, you have a choice, basically. And so opt-in, I think we were talking about. That's the way I read it. We were talking opt-in. It seems to lay out like that. Am I missing something? Like if a student wants to maintain an iPad via the schools, they can still do that if they refuse to bring their own device, right?
I would say using the word if they refuse, yes. But if we have to maintain everyone having an iPad, then we're still going to be financing a one-to-one program. So it's there has to be a process that they would go through to say they need a device. And if that's the device they want, it would also be expected that that's the device they're using for their learning at
I
school.
mean, based on your data, I wouldn't expect that. I mean, there'll be some people that have their own device but prefer to use a school device, but that's going to be, at least based on your surveys, pretty a minority of students.
Yes.
Okay.
Mrs. Bassett.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. For notability, what are the swap outs if you do not have a touch screen? Because it does sound to me like science and math classes tend to rely more heavily on notability, and I don't know of a substitute that doesn't require touch screen.
So for the note-taking part, obviously any word processing will work for that. The other is you can annotate PDFs without a touch screen. So touch screens are great. You don't need to have a touchscreen, but you can annotate PDFs through several different programs that some are free and some are $4 or $5 if you don't want ads.
Okay, and then we don't know that faculty rely on Notability in classes in those areas, or there's anything particular to consider for the maths and the sciences?
That's part of why we want to maintain the carts. So if there are any teachers in classes, so English, in the English department are heavy users right now, science department's heavy users. In the music classes, all of the notation is on iPads. So right now, they're thinking that they want to maintain the carts because they're anticipating the use. And I would speculate, since I've said speculate a lot during tonight, that when students have their own device, they're going to figure out how to use it on the device that they want to use. That's the trend of what tends to happen.
Thanks.
Mrs. Ackman.
So did the administration investigate? I feel like what we heard from the board is a lot of different kind of wading into this before kind of telling parents, go home, the expense is on you, go buy a device, which is a philosophical change. And I do think a significant one. We really don't do that in other areas under the statutes of free and appropriate education, blah, blah, blah. But did you look at what would it be to phase this in, to do an opt-in and see the results of it, to say to parents, we're not expecting you now on very short notice to go out for, if you have 3 children in the high school, to go buy 3 personal devices. But we will honor an opt-in and kind of collect data. Was there any thought to the conversations of either a true opt-in program or a phase-in program, all of which were different ideas that were kind of bantered around on Budget Saturday?
I'll start by saying there hasn't been a survey, so nothing formal, but we did look at, well, what do we need to run the rest of the programs with the iPads that we want to preserve, distribute to ELP, to special education, and make sure there's enough in the library. And once you do that, there's actually not that many iPads left, which leads to another question that appeared. I think it was Mr. Sini's question about, well, what does the replacement cycle become? Because ideally, you're not replacing iPads every 4 years when you've reduced the usage from whatever it was to, let's say, 40% less. So we're expecting the life of the iPads would be longer. Any type of, if you call it an opt-in, a phase-in, we certainly want to work with families that need device and help with the transition, and we will certainly do that. But it's not going to take that many devices to, I'll say, compromise the plan, because we need to have so many devices for testing. So if we have so many devices out and not enough to issue 2 grade levels to test that are testing at the same time, then we would have to collect devices from students mid-year, which would just be, I don't want to say managerially impossible, but it would be very challenging. And then we're taking away devices from students that might be using them.
So I guess just to follow up, given that we don't seem to, or we haven't heard kind of a clear standard of when you get a school issued device or when you don't, I'm a little worried exactly about that scenario. We do need devices for testing. We will have to replace, because in 3 or 4 years from now, we won't be having the kids use these old recycled iPads to take their SATs, or trust me, we'll have even longer public comment here. But so what do we do in that eventuality? I mean, I do think there is a planning issue for parents here. So what happens next year if a significant number of kids say, I need a device, I don't have a personal device? Like, do we have a standard, or are we crossing our fingers and hoping it'll be okay?
I wouldn't say we're crossing our fingers. The flexibility that we have is we don't need to deploy devices to ELP and to special education and to the libraries until we know we have devices to deploy. So step 1 is preserve the 50% of devices we need for testing and classroom use on the carts. 2, identify how many families might need that support with the device. And then number 3, we can continue with our deploying, and also the recycling, which we were planning to do with the grade 12. So we would just hold off on that until we know.
So thank you, Mrs. Ackman. So I think to that point, I mean, Mr. Tranberg, what I'm hearing is there needs to be a very defined communication approach to this. And, you know, some drop dead deadlines of when we need to hear back from families as to what the needs are for planning purposes. So, you know, and I think that this first year needs to really be looked at as a real transition year. and over, you may get people initially not wanting to bring their own device, but over time, when students see how everything's working in the schools, it continues to move toward bring your own device. But I think we have to be really careful about year one and how this transitions and the communication around it. Mrs. Klein.
If I may just add some color to the notion of how iPads are used for special education. For instance, many of our SLPs prefer using iPads for some of the programs. Polo Quo is one of them that's used. Also, OT therapists also very often for handwriting purposes use iPads. If we have those available, it's something we would distribute and use, but it's not. It's for specific programs that we're able to run.
Thank you, Mrs. Klein.
Can I also clarify, sorry, we're not withholding devices from special education and ELP, because I think that's what you're trying to say. Also, I just want to be clear, there are devices and students have access to devices, so.
Thank you, Mr. Tranberg. Mrs. Worm.
I know I saw it in here, but now I can't find it, about having a purchasing agreement so that people can purchase. If that's the case, would it be up and running by before graduation? Only because
I think
that year is going to be a very popular graduation gift for 8th grade.
Yeah, so I think what the board was whatever data we wanted to present, the specifications which we have there, and then that was the other question. So the staff is working with Apple for one, and we already have an agreement with, I think it's Apple at this point, and we're working with, I think it's Dell and maybe one other company to make sure that you could actually purchase it through that purchasing agreement and get
So
the
there'll be
benefit.
more than just the one option.
Correct,
There'll be multiple.
correct, yes, but
Great.
I fully anticipate those agreements being ready in time for, the spring, the end of the year.
Especially for the middle 6 students
Yeah.
graduating up. Mrs. Achman.
So I thought CPAC had an excellent question, again, on our budget Saturday. Like, what are the implications for assistive technology with this? What is our theory? I understand things are written in the IEPs, but I'm really struggling. I actually understand the financials of it and kind of love it. It helps our budget. What I'm struggling with is the theory on it. And if we're saying kids are responsible for their own devices in order to access their education, what are the implications? I understand special education has federal law to protect it, but those two theories seem to be combating each other for me right now. And that's where I'm wrestling. Anyone want to talk to me about how we have two different theories?
The two theories of.
There is a theory that is saying, what we are saying is you need a device as part of your educational experience in Darien schools. And we are saying, we are going to bring your own device. You need it, right? Much like you need a textbook, but we're providing the textbooks. We've decided we are not providing the technology. I thought CPAC had a great question when they said, what are the implications to things like assistive technology, which follow the same theory? Although I understand they're protected by law, we will uphold the law, they will be in the IEPs. It's the same thing. In order to access your education, you need certain technological devices and we will provide them for you. I feel as if those two theories are competing against each other and outside of IDA. I'm wondering as a district how we wrestle with that.
Yeah, I think some of this assistive technology, software, hardware, where this is provided under IDA is provided, so that's fine. But I think this applies to all students, right? And so the same way as you would have probably suggested, books apply to all students. So it's in that spirit that we would ask all parents and students to participate. I don't really see it conflicting, other than you certainly, the threshold of public education, everything has to be free. That is certainly a philosophical decision on this issue. I personally don't necessarily see it in a plan. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that you could do this contextually and also culturally and for the community itself. I wouldn't recommend it if I didn't think it would work in the community, but I respect difference of opinions on that.
Mr. Brown.
Thanks, Duke. Three quick things. First to Chris, this is probably getting way too into the weeds from the board perspective, but just following up with the notability question. Do we know the teachers can just export that as a PDF that the students can then read and access and have a copy to?
Sorry, Mr. Brown, can you repeat that?
Yeah, no problem. The notability that was discussed, the software for taking notes and doing annotations, that can be published to a PDF and viewed by students later. I'm just trying to confirm that. Yeah, I don't expect you to know off the top of your head, maybe you do, but that I was just want to make sure that that actually gets pushed out.
That's correct. It can be published. So once it's notated, it can be published and then they have a new version of that PDF.
All right, so if they just had the free reader, they'd be able to get to it. Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask is the survey that you put out, how long did that take to generate? And I asked just thinking ahead as we see how this works and kind of trim tab the numbers and things we need to have. What's the turnaround to do this kind of work?
So the survey took probably 3 to 4 days to make sure we had the questions right, going back and forth with administration. Then it was open for, I think, about 5 days for students.
All right, so if we want to do this month by month, I wouldn't want to task you with that, but that wouldn't be unreasonable.
It wouldn't be unreasonable. I would suggest that surveys tend to be much more effective, especially with students, when you ask 1 or 2 questions at a time.
Okay.
More likely to complete them.
All right. Fair
I think
enough.
that's actually true. That's actually human behavior, not student behavior.
It works for board members, I'd say. And then the only other question is, I was just thinking this conversation about providing access to tools and education. We have a dual hat here. We're also responsible to the taxpayers. And I think when you see this number here, the usage rate, we have to ask ourselves, if we're being faithful to the taxpayers as well. And this is not to you, Chris, it's just to the board. And I guess the thought there is, we had a long period where people were going to school online. We weren't providing internet connections for these people. That wasn't something we did. So we do have instances where we expect people to have technology or just have things day in, day out that, maybe when some of us at the table went to school wouldn't make sense or been excess, but now it's just kind of a given. So I'm not sure when we look at both groups we're responsible to how this isn't inappropriate. Thank you.
Mr. Tranberg, so I guess this popped into my head around the survey. So did we do a survey of the 8th grade class to see where they're at?
We did not, because the program is different. So they've had a device and they've not used iPads. So it would be hard to survey them on iPad usage, because we know they're using their Chromebooks. It's part of their programming in middle school. But iPad wouldn't, I'm not sure what insight that would give as far as us understanding iPad usage.
I think it's more about understanding how comfortable they are with bringing their own device up to the high school, or would they be looking to get a device from the high school?
So how many have a device types of questions?
Yeah. I mean, that's a big component. You've got a whole class moving up to the high school. Do they understand that they may have the option to bring their own device or need a school device? How does that play out? Mr. Sini.
So we're talking about providing devices, but I read question 1 and it says all students will be provided a device if they do not have one, right? So we're covering that. Those who are unable to purchase a device due to financial reasons will receive a school issued device, as will students who refuse to participate in the BYOD program. So we are providing devices for those who don't want that, or who can't afford them, or unable to purchase a device for some refuse, I guess. So I guess I think it's great. So it's, in my mind, it's an opt-in. I guess I'm struggling. Why would we hand out iPads if people don't use them? And that's what this survey was showing. I think it was 40%. I'm sorry. Yeah, 40% of students or less were using the iPad on a regular basis. So that's why I want to follow the superintendent's recommendation.
So the survey and the survey from our students played out in line with the focus group, that we're just relatively in a different place now, and the investment has been well made over the years, but we're just in a different place. One of the things, if someone asked me, whatever they ask, like, why would you do one-to-one period, right? My answer to them would be for students to take more ownership for their learning. And that's actually what they're actually doing at the moment and saying to us, let us take more ownership for learning through our own devices now. I believe.
Mrs. Ackman.
So that's, the answer that Mr. Assini is reading is the exact question I'm trying to get at with Chris. So are we prepared? So we have 65% of students answered us. Of that 65%, 40% aren't using it. Are we fully prepared if we roll this out to hand a device to any child who shows up at school and says, I don't have a device? And if we are, then it is a true opt-in program and I'm comfortable. If we're going to say, no, show me your qualification for free and reduced lunch, or else you have to go get it on your own, I'm less comfortable because I just think it's such a drastic transition. And I understand we have a responsibility to taxpayers, but we rolled this program out since 2015 under the idea that we provide what's necessary for school. So what I just want to make sure is if a student shows up at school and says, my mom and dad are the meanest parents in the whole world and I don't have a device, right?
They're
Do
getting
we
the
have a
device.
device
Yes,
for them?
they'll borrow, they will be able to borrow a device, yes.
Okay.
Now, I'm not calling, honestly, I'm not calling it an opt-in. I've spoken to several superintendents whose the system works pretty much the same. You go down to the library, you get right. And it's not really considered an opt-in. Perhaps it's a wee bit semantic, but just calling it an opt-in, we will provide anybody who needs a device. If someone genuinely can't afford one, that is a wee bit different.
Yeah, I'm just saying, are we asking that if someone can't provide it, or will we provide a device for someone who
Yes,
says,
we will.
I don't
We
have a
will.
device?
Yes.
So you're not necessarily gonna, if a student says they need a device, you're not necessarily gonna ask why, go down the path of they can't afford it. It's just, I mean, if a parent comes like they do for a field trip or something and say, there's a process to deal with that particular case. So, okay, yeah. Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. So you just used the word borrow in terms of, so if students, just going by your verbiage here, as well, students who refuse to participate in the BYOD program. So if I, being the meanest 8th grade parent on the planet, say to my 8th grader, sorry, I'm not buying you a device. And she shows up first day of freshman year, I need a device from the school. My mom's the meanest person ever. Will she have that third year or will she have it for a day?
If someone wants to borrow it for a day because they've forgotten it, or they just want to borrow it for a day, or their battery's dead or something else, they can borrow it for a day. If they want to borrow it for a semester, they can borrow it for a semester.
Okay.
Look, we're going to try and work with people in the transition of this, the same way as you're advocating, can you work with people because it's a tough transition? We will definitely, that's what we'll do.
Mr. Maroney.
And so I have two questions. One is, the first question was going to the question in the second sentence, after speaking to our peer district, that this is a model that is implemented. This is not a model that is implemented in those district, and the expectation that all students bring a device. My question is, did our peer district go from providing one-to-one to not providing one-to-one, or have they always been a bring your own device?
Oh, I would need to get clarified on an individual district. I would need to clarify that they, I don't think they changed. Richard, do you know of your district particularly?
I think most of them have always been BYOD. I don't know of any that have had a device and then.
Yeah, I don't think,
Because I think that's what we're struggling with, is we're going from one to another. It's not just, this is the way we've always done it. We're to Mrs. Ackman's point, we're radically changing what we've said we were doing for the last 5 years. So I think that's, at least for me, that's what we're struggling with. And then my other question is, and maybe this is to Rich, is, so if we're going to provide a device for a student, how are we going to budget for that in going forward in years? If we don't know what the number is, how do we budget for that 6 months before the first day of school?
Or 18 months.
Or 18 months.
So I think the expectation right now is if you forget your device, or if your parents refuse to provide you a device, we're going to provide you with the iPads that are existing. There is money in the budget to purchase a select few of MacBook Airs, and that could be for students who might not be economically available to purchase a device.
Mrs. McCammon.
I have a couple comments. Thank you for all the work, particularly the looking into the purchasing consortium and things like that. I agree that this is a change in program philosophy. I don't think it's inconsistent with how we approach public education. FAPE or free and public education is not a standard for, it's for special education or 504. It's not for what we use here. We do have things, or for the entire school system, excuse me, we do have things that we expect students to purchase. They have to purchase pencils and pens and folders and calculators. And so I think it is not without any, it's not completely unreasonable that students be allowed to purchase their own tools for education. And again, I've said, I think the data, I think just as a person, it's easier to not switch environments. And I think the data supports that. So that's my comment. Beyond that, just to confirm, if we do have a student who has a particular need, then that is, sometimes that's hardware, sometimes that's software, sometimes that's components that go with hardware. There are provisions under special ed law or FAPE where they would receive that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mrs. Best.
Thank you. So a couple thoughts. First, to be totally honest, I will admit that I'm surprised at how convinced I am that having your own device and not everyone having the same device sounds to be as workable and perhaps even preferable as it does. I've been someone who's kind of supported the iPads for everyone since we rolled this out. So I'll give that one up. What I will say is, I think obviously we've all agreed that there is a need to have a device. Every student has to have their own device. It is a need. And what we're saying now is we'd like to change the way we look at it and say that you are expected to provide that yourselves. And the hope and expectation is that each student will, unless they're unable to, or unless they decide to say that they will not do it. And that's where it falls off for me a little bit, especially with the timing, because we have always provided them and we provide them through the elementary school and the middle school. To make this change without even a holiday season in between when we change the practice and when you have to have that device by, it seems really quick to me, and it seems aggressive isn't the right word, but it seems like a lot to ask parents to either go and do it or say, no, I will not do it. And so that's why it feels to me like some kind of more defined and detailed, or, let's get the data, opt-in is a better approach to moving forward with this, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mrs. Best. Mrs. Ackman.
So a few points, and I think I'm landing where Mrs. Best is. The State of Connecticut Constitution, Section 8, provides for a free public education for elementary and secondary. That's where my conflict is coming. That's not a district thing. That is guaranteed by the state of Connecticut. And we do ask parents to provide crayons and pencils and scissors and calculators, but we also budget for all those things. And we budget for them based on a long period of experience of kind of knowing, okay, we need 10 scientific calculators at the high school in case someone can't get them, doesn't have them, and has to take a test. I'm not opposed to going here, but what I would be more comfortable with for consideration, and it's my opinion, is saying to parents as they enter the high school, do you want to opt out of this system, right? Will you guarantee for the next 4 years you'll get your own program? I'd sign that, right? I had one that used their iPads. I have one that uses her personal device. Then we would know how to budget. And I am really looking at it to both Mr. Maroney and Mr. Again, Dave, I'm blanking because you're not next to me, to Mr. Brown's point, then we could budget. We would know, okay, at our incoming class, 65% of our class has said, don't purchase one for me. So I can actually budget in terms of my fiscal responsibility. Now, I'm not saying that's the only way to do it, but to Mrs. Best's point, it's a little like, well, our fingers are crossed. I think we can do it. I'm not doubting you. I'm just worried how to exercise my financial obligations and buy enough and not too many, because it would sound like currently we are buying too many, and that's not good. But I don't know where to do this 18 months out unless we start asking parents to truly opt in or opt out.
So one of the concerns I have just is we're sort of recognizing that the iPad's not being used in the way but by an opt-in, we're actually giving them the very device with that essentially we're saying it isn't really working as well. So that's a wee bit of, that goes with the whole opt-in, opt-out discussion. I'd like to try and make the transition as quickly as possible, but also as reasonably and thoughtfully as possible.
And can I,
Thank
can I
you.
just add
Mr.
to that?
Tramberg.
And we do have some data right now. So we know that 86% of current students have a device and 72 bring that device to school every day. So if we were going to use that as a metric or as an indicator now, we also know that we have 50% of our iPads that are still available and aren't necessarily going to go to carts. So we have the devices now. So that gives us a year and some space and some time to plan more appropriately for FY24. Because if students need a device, we're not anticipating that we need to add more to this budget.
But I think to the point about the budget conversation is, I think until you go, you have to be very clear about that 8th grade class, and that starts the clock as to what percentage of those kids opt in or decide they need a device, and then that starts to carry you through. You start to see what the 4 years look like. Mr. Maroney.
Yeah, so from what I just heard, it's, what I understood was we have enough devices to have half the class be provided, half the high school to be provided devices. And in the following year, which in theory would give parents and students enough time to purchase new computers, we will be going to bring your own device. But will there be the option that the school will provide it, or will it just be a bring your own device? And maybe that's a different question, but to me, it's part of our discussion here today.
It would be the same for the students who can't afford it, and there's a method as there is for anything else, right? So those special situations.
But the parents who refuse to buy, who are the meanest parents?
So it's the same as if,
I don't mean to call her parents.
it's the same if Mrs. Parent is mean in 5th grade, or if she's mean in 5th grade. If she continues to be mean, we'll continue to give a device to the student.
Right. Good conversation, good questions. Any further conversations around the bring your own
Real,
device?
real quick, Duke.
Yeah, Mr. Brown.
Chris, I just want to say thanks for running the survey. It's good to have the data here. I really appreciate it. And I think that as a board member, just a quick comment, I think that this process we've gone through, the board put in a policy, it didn't work. We had data that showed it didn't work, and we've had a conversation. Now we're realizing we need to make some changes. And I think that it's a great exercise. This has been for us to realize we get new data, we get new facts, and something we're doing doesn't work, then we should be able to go back and change it, which we're doing here. So I'm glad we went through this exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Does the board have any questions specific around the questions that were answered in the back of the deck? We're good? All right, thank you all. We will move on to public comment. Michelle, let me just tee up public comment, as we've had a lot of comments and questions about public comment. Excuse me. What? I can't hear you, John. Sorry. No. I've got something to say about public comment first. I think Michelle will go through her process, but I think it's important to just reiterate, and I think it's a good opportunity. And I spent some time even with our board council on this. So public comment's an important agenda item for the board, district, and community. It gives us the ability to hear from the public, and the option for Zoom for meetings has contributed to more people being involved. A professional, constructive, and respectful dialogue is how we listen and work together. The board has discussed how we make public comment more efficient with the goal of always listening. Reviewing some recent public comments and getting feedback from the board and the public, it seems like a good opportunity to review public comment. I've also reviewed this with board counsel, who agrees that we have a good public comment process. Many districts are looking at public comment, 3 minutes versus 2 minutes, to allow more public comment. The timing of public comment, beginning of meeting or end of meeting, or both. Many districts I've found only have one public comment. So we will continue to look at what's best for our community and district. Some reminders around public comment. Public comment is 3 minutes per person. You cannot speak for 3 minutes and look to speak again during the first public comment session, but you can speak at the end of the public meeting in the second session for an additional 3 minutes, should you choose to do so. Keep in mind that you are addressing the Board of Education with your public comments, nobody else. Board of Ed public comment should not be used to respond to or argue a point made by a person that has made a public comment. It is not a debate forum. Comments about other town committees or organizations should be made to those entities at their public meetings or public comment section of their meetings, should they have public comment. If your comments align with what has previously been said, you can acknowledge that with your name and address that you agree with comments that have been previously said that evening about the topics you agree with. Also, the Darien public comment should focus on the Darien Board of Ed agenda and programs and topics specific to the district and education. So I think that's a good reminder around public comment. And our goal, as always, is to listen, learn, and continue to move forward with what we hear from the public and many times over the last year from our students. So Michelle, with that, I'll turn it over to you, and we will start with, you can start your spiel, and then we'll turn it over to folks in the audience.
Good evening. If you would like to speak, and this is for Zoom, if you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raise hand option. You will notice a blue hand icon appear in the upper corner of your screen where your face, name, or number appears. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. For
Thank
people
you,
in
Michelle.
person, the chair will identify you.
So we'll start with our friends in the audience. Anyone who would like to speak, please come up to the podium. Okay, I'll come back to public. Michelle, we'll go to Zoom land.
Okay. Miss Julia Geisen, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hi, it's Julia Geeson. Thank you. I'm at 1 Walmsley. I just have a question in regard to bring your own device. Has the board or anyone else for that matter had a conversation about if there needs to be controls, right, to put into place from students bringing maybe, having unauthorized apps or, I don't want to say this, but like bringing pornography or anything like that, that they could share at school and would take away from, the education and learning session?
So thank you for your question.
Stefan Amrali, you are unmuted and recognized.
Good evening. My name is Stefan Amrali. I live at 531 Hall 3 Ridge Road. I have 4 children in the school district, and my comment is mostly about open choice. I want to just start by saying I was born in Alexandria, Egypt myself, and I'm very much for diversity. However, the mission of the school board in Darien is to serve the residents of Darien and the citizens of Darien. As I look through the numbers about the cost of the new students, I don't see it, the indirect costs adding up to the numbers that we've seen so far. There's a lot of indirect non-fixed costs associated with that. And the concern is also what the impact that might have on our school district from bringing students from other schools, whether that's in high school, elementary school. Darien is a beautiful community, and we've been living in Darien for about 5 years now. We came from out in the Hamptons and Quogue, and a lot of Darien families that have homes out in the Hamptons. And we lived in what used to be the best school district out in the Hamptons. And they have instituted, the Quogue School District directly, instituted a similar program where they can tuition in school students from other school districts. The school was rated 9 out of 10 in terms of the quality of the school. After they started this program, they've lost a lot of students in the program, and a lot of people moved out of the town, and the school's now rated 6 out of 10. Darien has a deep history and heritage in being a community and a destination town for education. That's the reason why we're here. And I fear the impact on the program will have on Darien itself might be far greater than has been implied through all the conversations and that we've heard tonight. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much for speaking.
Catherine Bailey, you are unmuted and recognized.
Catherine, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
Just a second.
Good.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Hi. I'm a person of color, and I believe that this program is detrimental to Darien. I feel as though I'm all for diversity, and while the state says that it offers $3,000 per student, the fact is that the annual cost for Darien students is $23,000. I'm concerned about the additional $20,000 per student that the district might be not paying for. Also, I've been in town for 9 years and I've seen class sizes increase, and we all know that instruction suffers with larger class sizes. This program, I think, would hurt Darien students by increasing class size. And I think English as a second language students are not ideal candidates for this program because entry into the Darien schools offers less support, as their home districts would probably have greater ESL support and experience and would cost Darien more money. I also have concerns that non-disadvantaged families will exploit this program for disadvantaged families, and wondering what tests are being done to make sure that that doesn't happen. While I would love for all students to be in great schools, we have paid a premium to live in Darien because of the schools. It seems unfair to let students into the school when we weren't afforded that luxury. Thanks so much. 5 Spring Grove Street, Darien.
Thank you for speaking.
Sorry, can you repeat your address? I couldn't hear you. Sorry.
5 Spring Grove Street.
Thank you.
Alicia Skinner, you are unmuted and recognized.
Thank you. Alicia Skinner, Cliff Avenue. Look, I'm not sure why this year in particular we've decided to propose a program like Open Choice. In my opinion, the timing of it can't be worse given all the stress and anxiety and educational deficits that have been faced by our children and the additional pressure that's been put on our teachers. The main priority right now should be making sure that all of our children are back in a proper classroom and in a normal setting. Darien has not shown any decrease in school enrollment in recent history. The current budget does not project a decline in the student population. If anything, our enrollment is likely to rise. We have been discussing that on this call, that there's currently 280 or 300 apartments in construction or soon to be in construction. We do not yet know how many of the residents that are moving in to these buildings will have children, what ages those children are. How can we commit to take on kids from another district when we don't even know if we have the space in our classrooms for our kids? The Board of Education members are elected to serve us first, the Darien residents, the taxpayers, and our children. With each student that Darien takes on from Norwalk, we are making a 13-year commitment, okay? Let that sink in. This is not something that we are just piloting for a year. If we take on a child, we are committed to that child for 13 years. And I don't see how we can commit to taking on children right now, given all the new construction in town and the other unknowns. And lastly, I think if the main goal of Open Choice is purely to help diversity statistics, then we should not ignore the path that we are on as a town. I'm an immigrant from Poland. There are many immigrants in this town from Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Morocco, Austria. I think we heard some other callers today. Do not overlook us. We represent a wide range of countries, different ethnic backgrounds, different religions, different cultures. This town is indeed becoming more diverse every year. And certainly it's become more diverse since I moved here 8 years ago. And I think it will be even more diverse in 8 years' time when the construction projects are completed. And that's a wonderful thing. Why? Because it's a natural evolution. It is done organically. So again, I think the message for this board is to please focus on our children before you take on a commitment to other children through this Open Choice program. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments this evening.
Katie V, you are unmuted and recognized.
Katie, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Katie Vanovich. I live at 118 Hecker. I have 4 children in 3 different schools, 1 in 9th, 1 in 7th, and 2 in 3rd grade. I just felt the need to comment on the BYOD program. I appreciate the detail and the discussion this evening. It didn't exactly give me comfort. Since the first budget meeting in which this was discussed a few weeks ago, I'm glad to hear there's consideration for students to not participate in the program, although I do not particularly like the wording of refuse. My students have always used the school issued devices and we don't have access to another device in our home. So admittedly, I was quite shocked when I first heard of it. As far as I'm aware, it's my understanding that my children in high school and middle school can't function in the classroom or at home with homework without a device. So it is clearly an absolutely essential part of their public school education. That might not have been the case several years ago when a device was a nice to have item, but considering a device is now fundamental, I don't understand how the district could even consider the possibility of not providing a device. A pencil and a device are not the same thing. What I'm hearing from this program is that our free public education may come with a significant cost. I can understand budget needs. I fully support that if it is a waste of budget for every student to be automatically provided a device, then don't issue a device for every student. However, for those of us who have students who do use their school issued device, who do not have other devices at home, I would strongly request that you do not impact our public school education by implementing a significant financial hurdle. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments this evening.
Val Ortel, you are unmuted and recognized.
Can you hear us, Val Ortel?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's Joe Ortel. I just happen to be using my wife's computer.
Sure. Thank you.
Don't want any confusion around that. Look, I would just like to say that you mentioned class size several times and 85% of max. And I just want to ensure that I completely agree. We don't want to use open choice as an excuse or a reason to, I think, move our class sizes up substantially. I think we all agree that the larger the class size, the education will suffer. And I completely agree with the woman who spoke earlier, saying that we have far more important things to focus on with our students here, given everything that they've been through. I think we've all read all the studies that say everything that they've lost during these prior years of COVID. And I think that should be our main focus at this particular time, is ensuring that our Darien students be able to make it up and continue to improve and increase their educational capacity over the coming years to make up for what they've suffered in COVID.
Thank you for your comments this evening.
Mr. Ortel, may I have your address, please?
48 Shields Road.
Thank you.
Peter McGinnis, you are unmuted and recognized.
Can you hear us, Peter? Peter, can you hear us? Peter,
can you hear me? Can you hear me at this point?
We can hear you. Thank you, Peter. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for having this special meeting. I really appreciate the attention. I'm going to really speak very quickly because I only have 3 minutes. One thing Mr. Chip Dumont did not mention was the 2015 Connecticut State Department of Education report, page 17 on analysis of choice programs indicates that open choice programs actually result in a negative outcome for 6th to 8th graders. He presented that to the New Canaan public schools, but he did not present that here. So I ask you to have him take a look at that with you all again. Second, I would just ask you to look further into English language learners. English language learners are not special education. That comes out of Darien's pocket. I've mentioned this before, and specifically I mentioned if you had a couple of Spanish immigrants and maybe a Brazilian immigrant, you all would need to pay for that. Lastly, I want to talk about marginal costs. Back in December, I mentioned marginal costs, and I gave you the analogy of an empty movie theater and a full-service restaurant. We understand marginal costs. Marginal cost in the case of an empty movie theater, marginal cost is 0. You have those empty spots. You would take people in and charge them just $1. We're not in that scenario. We're in a full-service restaurant with 4 waiters, 3-course meals, and we are setting a menu price at $23, and we're agreeing to serve for 13 years in return for a fixed $3 reimbursement. Back in December, when I tried to explain this issue, I also looked up quite a bit on marginal cost. We understand it. The best place I can refer you to is a Georgia Public Policy Foundation report, February 2019. The only way to determine marginal costs is through a multiple regression analysis that has not been done. So a good example is $410. You may not break the tipping point this year, but with that class, you could break it in the third, the fourth, the fifth year. So remember, that is a static model. So this analysis that I looked at says some people may be surprised at the size of the estimated marginal cost values. Again, this Georgia report, they were at $10,000, $11,000 on a marginal cost basis. After all, shouldn't a district be able to squeeze in one more student in a classroom for almost no additional cost? The answer is that while at times additional students will impose a very small cost on a school. Okay, take a look at the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis.
Mr. McGinnis, can you please remind us of your address?
Your address, Mr. McGinnis?
He's muted.
He's muted.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Go ahead, Mr. McGinnis.
22 Robin Hood Lane. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. McGinnis.
Paula Sardoni, you are unmuted and recognized.
Paula, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Go ahead. Thank you.
So, my name is Paula Sardoni, 15 Tower Drive. So I just would like to share an experience we had last year. I hope some members of the board will remember this as well. So last year, our school anticipated only 3 sessions for 4th grade, which probably was calculated on the budget around the time in May, probably. And there was a lot of house overturned in the summer last year. And my kid ended up in a class with 26 students. It was difficult for the teachers. The parents came in front of the board September last year, asking for, not last year, but this, I don't even remember, but it was 2020, asking for another session, another class. It was denied because there wasn't on the budget. There was no budget for another teacher. So my question is, how can we commit to a student in May without knowing what's going to happen in the house market in the summer? You know, that happens to us. And the school had 19 students in 3 classes. And then by the end, they had 26 by the end of the summer. And there was no way to accommodate the students that were here in town. So I heard the discussion. So I really hope that you consider that the house market happens a lot in the summertime. So I can support expanding this program that would make this type of problems more frequent, both by bringing in more students and further straining our budget. I heard a discussion from the board in regards to the elementary schools, but the concern is also the middle school. The middle school, for as far as I know right now, is really full, is at capacity. They are trying to accommodate more students. There was a consideration to have 5th grade there. There was no way to do that because they don't have room. So I think our middle school should be under consideration as well. Well, those are my 2 points that I hope you guys consider during this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Have a good night.
Username Deb, you are unmuted and recognized.
Deb, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all for this special meeting tonight. My name is Deb Daniil. I live at 66 Middlesex Road. I have 3 children, each one in the elementary, one in the middle school, and one in the high school. I'm a 22-year resident here in Darien, and I agree with a lot of the callers that I've already heard about the diversity in this town differing over the past 22 years that I've lived here. But I want to address a couple of things about the open choice. First and foremost, I have read 2 studies online or 2 published papers online about one first in Good Morning Wilton, talking about the Westport school districts and the allocated funds that are given by the state, and then those that are actually spent by the school district, and we're talking a substantial amount of money in the difference. They're saying 2,900 per student is what they're giving back. And they're also saying that the average cost per student is 22,000, which is a total net cost for Westport at $1.2 million. That's a very large number. I'd also like to address the fact that you talked about Fairfield and expanding their program. In fact, Fairfield came out with a paper today in the Fairfield Citizen online saying that half the board is split on that decision on whether or not to open up the school district to more students because of the cost funding to their BOE budget. So I think I've heard a lot of great information on this program, but I've also am left with a lot of questions. We don't know capacity size. We're saying that schools are not at full capacity. I heard specifically that homeschool is not at full capacity, yet we're using 2 trailers to house the students. So I don't know how we can't be at full capacity when we're still using trailers out in the back. And we have not considered any of the impacts of the pandemic on our students. That has not been addressed. We don't know what that is going to be. So that combined with the fact that we have housing developments going up and we've had an influx of people into this town in the last 2 years that have moved out of the city or have moved from other areas, we don't know. And the board has already admitted that you don't have data on the housing development and how many bedroom housing is going up or being built in the town, or anyway, any significant data. I think more research needs to be done before we can implement this open choice in the town. And I agree with the other residents that say we need to think of the students here in town first and how to best meet their needs. We are the residents, we are the taxpayers, we fund
Thank
this.
you. Your time is up. Thank you very much for speaking.
Thank you.
Miss Carolina Magui, you are unmuted and recognized.
Carolina, can you hear us?
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Karina Magowi, 28 Kempsett Lane. I wanted to thank the CES gentleman who came to the presentation tonight. I thought the information was fantastic, and I'm eager in more support of the open choice for our schools. I have 2 children who arrive as ESLs, not to this district, but to different countries as kindergartners, and you would be surprised how easily my children learn Portuguese and Spanish when we move to those respective countries. And I just want to say, I'm quite surprised about a lot of the comments about the racial divides in town. And I do think we're listening to our children by bringing this program to town. They're screaming and have come to our meetings to tell us how much they need people that are different. So we become a more open and accepting school system. So I'm totally pro open choice. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much for speaking this evening.
Nicholas Lalarge, you are unmuted and recognized.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Nicholas. Thank you.
That's great, thank you.
Nicholas, could you just give your last name and your address, please?
Yes, Nicholas Lalarge, 17 Wilson Ridge Road.
Thank you.
So I'd like to make a comment about the open choice, and I do have a question about the process to Dr. Adley and the Board of Education. I'll start by saying that I'm originally from France, and I moved to Darien 12 years ago, bringing some diversity to the town of Darien. As a parent with 3 kids in Darien school system, 2 in elementary and 1 in middle school, I disagree with the open choice initiative for Darien for the following reasons. Our kids have suffered for the past 2 years because of the pandemic, doing remote learning, witnessing teachers being absent, stress of being quarantined because of COVID tracing, wearing masks for 6 hours and more, and attending classes with overcrowded students. We've also witnessed the incoming of many new families into the Darien school district from New York and other states, and putting additional pressure in our school system on our students, on our teachers, we have to deal with overcrowded classes. So my view is that we should focus on our resources and energy to the education of the current student in Darien instead of increasing Darien schools to other districts. Where would we want to implement open choice now? Therefore, my question is that I'd like to understand from Dr. Radley and the Board of Ed, what would be the process to change of course of action at this stage and reconsider this open choice initiative at a later stage? Do we need to call a specific meeting? Do we need to show by popular vote, like a referendum, the magnitude of the parents that I think would disagree with the approach? So I guess this is a question to you, Dr. Radley, and to the board. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments this evening.
Username Bill's iPhone, you are unmuted and recognized.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you. Please continue.
Okay, cool. Sorry. I'm struggling technologically.
All good.
As I usually am. I'm here to just say that I'm opposed to the open choice program at this time.
Could you just state your last name and address again, please?
Sure. Lennox and 1 Illinois Road.
Thank you.
I'm here to just say that I'm opposed to the open choice program at this time. Dr. Adley's already testified to the state of Connecticut explaining that the school budget when he was a super up in the Granby schools didn't work. And he had to cut existing programs to make it work then. The numbers didn't work then. They don't work now. I think he said he needed $10,000 per student per year back in 2009. I heard Mr. Nyquist say we'll never be guaranteed any funding from the state going forward as well. I hope is not a strategy going forward here. And I hope Dr. Adley's experience with this program informs the board. Meanwhile, in Darien, 4 of 5 grammar schools are still using trailers to school our children. Kids are eating lunch in hallways. Kids are staying in their classrooms to eat lunch. The social distancing decisions have completely upended our school's social and emotional learning. That should really be the priority moving forward. When we have inevitable budget shortfalls, which programs will be the first to be cut? The board should identify these ahead of time. We deserve to know exactly which programs are inferior to open choice. I've signed a petition against this program with another 900 plus town residents and parents, and I urge you all to please listen. I've said in the past, good intentions are admirable, but we are lacking data and we're lacking some perspective, I think. Open choice is not the right choice. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking this evening.
Karen Cummins, you are unmuted and recognized.
Karen, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Good. Your full name and address, please. Thank you.
Hi. Yes, my name is Karen Cummins. I live at 19 Point of Woods Road South, and I have 2 kids in the Darien School District. I'm here to advocate for the open choice program in Darien. I believe this program will benefit both Darien students and up to 16 Norwalk families who don't have access to the excellent public schools we enjoy here in Darien. I did read Dr. Adley's document before this meeting. Based on that thorough analysis, based on all of the great questions that the board asked tonight and the answers that were given, and particularly the fact that this program offers tremendous flexibility, year-to-year analysis, even with 16 potential kids coming in for the next 13 years. I believe there is much more upside and very little downside. And I just want to reiterate a handful of the points that were discussed. Based on the analysis that Dr. Adley and the team did, the revenue exceeds the projected expense over the next several years. And the fixed costs of $23K per student is not a factor. That will not change regardless of an additional 16 students, as I understand it. There are approximately 4,800 students now in the Darien School District. We are talking about adding up to 16 open choice students, which is 0.003% of our student body. Even if you assume 2,000 of them are kindergarteners across all of the schools, that's 0.006% of our total student body. And based on current projections, we can implement this without increasing student capacity any more than we have in years prior, where we hit higher levels. Just for a corporate anecdote, and a personal one. As a longtime corporate executive, I have seen firsthand that you can innovate, you can experiment, and you can move out of your comfort zone to grow, learn, and often succeed, or you can keep the status quo and stagnate. I think it is worth trying and testing the open choice program, measuring its success over time, and if it does become burdensome on our school or our budget, we can always discontinue it and just commit to the students at least in the next year for the next 13 years. I think we have the chance to do the right thing here, set a great example for our kids that Darien is a generous, caring, and open-minded community, one who is also willing to get our own kids out of this bubble and try new things and bring opportunity to those outside who are in less fortunate academic circumstances. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for speaking this evening.
John Dunn, you are unmuted and recognized.
Can you hear us,
John
John?
Dunn, 175 Raymond. Tonight we heard from the Connecticut Educational Services and the Open Choice Coordinator. This organization has an obvious vested interest in and financial incentive to expand Hartford's Open Choice program to our small town. More importantly, I would ask the board tonight to hear and heed the concerns of nearly 1,000 of your constituents who are opposed to funding both the Open Choice program and DEI consultant Ken Shelton. There are so many concerned parents and residents in Darien right now. Over the past 5 days, 920 people representing approximately 650 households in town have signed a petition objecting to funding Open Choice and DEI consultant Ken Shelton in the upcoming budget. Let me repeat that. 920 people representing approximately 650 households, 27 during the special meeting alone, I'm told. That's a phenomenal response in such a short period of time for a 2-issue petition. The petition simply states, quote, we the undersigned Darien residents and taxpayers right to state our strong objection to Open Choice program that is being considered as part of the current budget process and to the hiring of DEI consultant Ken Shelton from California. We urge each of the members of the Darien Board of Education to reject these expenditures from being included in the 2022-2023 budget, end quote. A link to the petition can be found at openchoicewrongchoice.org. That's openchoicewrongchoice.org. Have proponents of Hartford's Open Choice program demonstrated the same level of community support in such a short period? I believe the answer is no. Open choice is the wrong choice for Darien. Continuing to work with Mr. Sheldon is the wrong choice for Darien. The board should listen to its constituents. Their message is clear. Do not fund these initiatives. It is the obligation of the board to vote for what our town is clearly indicating as its preference. Let's shift our focus to getting back to normal for the benefit of our children before even discussing such drastic changes to our schools. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking this evening.
Miss Armel Jacobs, you are unmuted and recognized.
Can you hear
Hi,
us?
so Armel is actually my wife. My name is Scott Vitsoon. I live at 12 Fitz Avenue, and we have a kindergartner and a 2-year-old. I wanted to start off by saying thank you to Mr. Nyquist for taking the time at the beginning of the meeting. I think he gave some very clear and concise, direct answers to a lot of the kind of nebulous fears and misinformation, I think, going around about the Open Choice program. And a couple of points I wanted to reiterate. Number one being Darien controls how many kids go in. We're not making a commitment to accept 16 years this year, or 16 kids every year. If we have space, we let people in. And I think we're losing sight of kind of the bigger picture here. What we're talking about is giving families and children from underprivileged areas the opportunity at a better education. We're talking about letting kindergartners in. And I don't think anybody is necessarily focusing on that. And when you object to these types of programs, I want you to think about what you're actually objecting to. What you're objecting to is bringing in maybe a minority, maybe a kid from a poorer family, and letting them get the same education as your child. There is no tangible negative impact of having that student in your child's classroom. And to say otherwise and to focus on these other, objections, we can't predict our future enrollment. This is going to cost us $20,000, which obviously is wrong. I think is disingenuous, and I think it's cruel, to be honest. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking this evening.
Krista Carnes, you are unmuted and recognized.
Can you hear us, Krista?
Yep. Hi, this is
Good.
Krista Carnes. I'm at 40 Fitch Avenue. I just want to echo, first, Mr. Dean, thank you very much for clarifying the ground rules of the public comment. I think that was really helpful in order to sort of keep us on focus. I do think that the presentation tonight was very clear. I think it was very thorough. I think as a board, you guys were very deliberative, and I applaud you for doing that. I think some of the commenters tonight came with preconceived comments, and I don't know if they took the opportunity to truly listen. So I think Ms. Cummins had some excellent points, as did Mr. Witham. This is an opportunity for us to be better. This is an opportunity for us to put our trust in you as a board to manage this program, because it's not only the right thing to do, but it's going to make our students better. There's plenty of research that shows that diversity in all its forms helps academic performance. It helps teams work better in the workplace. There's a lot out there. So make a measured approach, use your best judgment. This is something that can be managed year upon year, and I think we would all be better for it. Thank you.
Thank you for speaking this evening.
There are no more raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. I'll go back real quickly to our folks in-house.
Sorry, I need to get to my notes. My name is Natasha Tomai. I live at 6 McLaren Road South. I'm speaking as a mom and a member, an involved member of this community, and a strong supporter of underprivileged youth in Stamford and Norwalk. I am also a strong proponent of charter schools and toward Achievement First in New Haven first when I was 23 years old. So what I want to convey here is what I want my children to learn is that two things can be true at the same time. That you can be pro diversity, equity, and inclusion and want the right person to do it. You can be absolutely pro equal opportunities for education. In fact, we have seen proven success in charter schools. I think the question we should be asking ourselves, because I will get behind anybody here who wants to go help charter schools get built in Norwalk or Stamford. And let me tell you, I will get behind you and we can get it done. I care about the youth in our community. I care about our own youth. I am worried about their mental health. I'm worried about the 69 new IEPs, the over 80% increase in children with autism diagnosis, 1 in 44 now, based upon the last report. I mean, that really concerns me here in town. Again, the unintended consequences. I think that open choice is something that can be looked at further. But I think anybody who's virtue signaling, anyone who's saying that you are good or evil, you are doing the right thing or the wrong thing, anybody, regardless of their position or how likable they are, who's sending that message out, should really take a step back and say, is it possible that two things can be true at the same time? I think we're making immense progress here as a community. We're hitting bumps along the road, and there's some, discourse among ourselves, but we are moving forward. Like, let's move forward, right? And get our own stuff sorted out, get it sorted out. Like, how do we talk to each other? How do we talk to our children? And then open up, decide if we want to open up to the community, or decide if we want to band together and get some charter schools built and make a real impact, not on 16 kids, but on all of those other kids that we heard the person speak tonight say that they're outperforming kids in the district that they came from. How unfair is that? How unfair is it if a sibling gets in and somebody else doesn't? We're going to split up families? So anyway, anyone wants to get on board with me, to help the communities outside, I'm happy to do that. And I just want to say that I personally, I feel like we are moving forward and I'd like to keep doing that. Thanks.
Thank you for speaking this evening. Anyone else from our audience?
We have a
Katie-
new,
I'm sorry. Go right ahead. Katie Loveland, 24 Maplewood Drive. Just one question for right now regarding the one-to-one versus BYOD. Is it possible that the low rates of student usage are due to the choice of device issued? My understanding is that when the iPads were chosen, that was a sensible and compatible choice at the time when one-to-one was first implemented. But it seems that now it might be time to change the device that's issued rather than discarding the policy entirely. As people have said, it's not possible to access our curriculum without a device anymore. And I just wonder if perhaps we're not looking at the reason the iPads aren't being using because they're iPads. And, we heard from the technology chair that when that was introduced, a lot of the software needed to be used were application-based. But now that it's web-based, the computers are more effective. So just a question about considering the change of the device issue.
Thank you, Katie. Anyone else from the public here? All right, good. With that, thank you all for participating, the questions and emails, much appreciated. We will continue to move forward in the budget cycle, and may I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Ackman, second by Mrs. Best. All those